Hello and good afternoon, Sir Jeff and classmates. My name is Kyle Adrian Pianante, and I will be the first reporter to report the discourse analysis. So, introduction: key topics in the study of discourse analysis. So, what is discourse analysis? So, to begin with, discourse analysis might be defined as the study of language. Discourse analysis is seen often as a branch of linguistics, the scientific study of language. Different facets of language are studied by various types of linguists. The study of language sounds and usage is the focus of phonologists. Lexicographers research words, their history, and their meanings. Grammarians investigate the way words are combined to create spoken words and phrases. Additionally, discourse analysts examine how sentences and utterances combine to form text and interaction, as well as how they work within our social environment. So, in other words, or in simple terms, discourse analysis is the study of language, which is often considered as a branch of linguistics. And different aspects or linguists study various aspects of the language. So, phonologists focuses on the sounds, lexicographers on word history and meanings, and grammarians on sentence structure. And discourse analysts specifically explore um, how sentences and utterances form text and interactions, examining their possible role within our social or within the social context. So, but discourse analysis is not just the study of language, but a way of looking at language that focuses on how people use it in real life to do things like to joke, argue, and persuade and flirt, and to show that they are certain kinds of people or belong to certain groups. So we have here the four ways of or four main assumptions and the ways of looking at the language. So first, language is ambiguous. So it says that language is ambiguous or simply means ambiguity. So if we say ambiguity, it is the quality of being open to more than one interpretation. So it means that the language doesn't always have a single or clear meaning. Words or phrases can be understood in different ways. So when we communicate, the interpretation solely based on the interpretation or the perspective of others. Second is language is always in the world. So the description here is that is what language means is always a matter of where and when it is used and what it is used to do. So for me it means that language is always shaped by its context. The meaning of words depends on the situation in which the language is used to, such as the place, context, the time, and what could be the purpose of communicating to others. The third is the way we use language is inseparable from who we are and the different social groups to which we belong. The description is we use language to display different kinds of social identities and to show that we belong to different groups. So lastly, the language is never used all by itself. So based on the book, it is said that it is always combined with other things, such as our tone of voice, the facial expression, and gestures when we speak, the fonts, the layout, and the graphics we use in written text. So the four main assumptions will be discussed in the latter part of the reporting bit. So here we have language is ambiguous. So everybody has had the experience of wondering what someone, whether they were a friend, a father, or lover, really meant by what they said. So in some instances, we have situations whereas our friend tells us that they like us. So it makes us wondering, what does that mean? If they like us as a lover or as a friend. It depends on your perspective and your perception of the question. So in actuality, almost every communication has certain meaning components that are not explicitly conveyed by the spoken word or written words. We may not be expressing ourselves clearly and directly even when we believe we are. So for example, asking, do you have a pen? It's like you are not directly stating that if I can borrow or can I borrow your pen. Instead, it is trying to imply if they have a possession over a pen. So in order for this question, or in order for them to understand this question as a request, the other person needs to undertake a process of figuring out of what we truly meant. So they must interpret our intent considering the context and their knowledge of the current situation. So the process now is like it's too long, or it takes time, but it helps them to understand that you are indirectly asking to borrow a pen. So the idea that individuals don't always mean what they say and that people don't always say what they mean can serve as a foundation or idea for our discourse analysis research. So it is like saying that discourse analysis starts with the idea that individuals doesn't always say exactly, or doesn't say the exact phrase of what they mean, or mean exactly what they communicate. So that shows how ambiguous our language is. Saying, and we can believe that expressing clear thoughts or expressing precise phrases on someone is an impossible thing to do, because it is said that language is an imperfect tool, or language is a flawed instrument for accurately expressing a wide range of our thoughts and emotions. And here, secondly, whenever we communicate, we always intend to convey more than one thing. This is what I said earlier, that the people doesn't always mean what they say, or people don't always say exactly what they mean. Just like the example earlier, when we borrowed a pen, or when we ask our friend if she has a pen, which means we are trying to communicate that we only need a pen. That is why we need to directly ask if they have a pen, even when we know they have one. So we have another assumption here, which is the language in the world. So making reference to the social context in which someone is speaking or writing is one of the most crucial ways we can decipher what they mean when they communicate. So this means that we need to grasp the situation in which someone is speaking or writing to interpret the message clearly. So depending on who is speaking it, when and where it is uttered, and to whom, an utterance can have a significant change in meaning. So for example, when a student is preparing to take an exam, a teacher can ask them the same question we covered earlier, which is, do you have a pen? Which is, it is unlikely that the teacher is hesitant to speak with a pupil, or that is a request. So because it is, we can interpret in we can interpret it in two ways, in which if the teacher is asking for a pen or asking to borrow a pen, or questioning the student if he has a pen or he had a pen. So, in other words, when we speak of discourse, we are always speaking of language that is in some way situated. And language is always situated in at least four ways. So, first, language exists in the physical world and in the places where we come into contact with it, whether it in a textbook, on a store sign, or on a website. It shapes how we understand it or how we interpret it. Second, language is a part of relationships. One of the primary methods via which we might decipher the meaning of when we write or talk, we're alluding to their identity, our familiarity with them, and if they possess any sort of authority over us. So it's like when we speak or write something, no, we are communicating not only information, but also our own identity and our relationship with a person we're having a communication with. So third, language is contextual. So historically, that is in light of past events and anticipated future events occur later. It is like um, the meaning of language depends on the time or the which is the past and the future events. So past events influence how we interpret things now. And we can also consider that it might happen in the future when we are trying to understood this language. So lastly or finally, language is situated in relation to other languages. Utterances and text always respond to or refer to other utterances and text. That is, everything that we say or write is situated in a kind of nature of disclosure. So it is like that language is connected with the different fields, or it exists within the web of the other languages. Our words always respond to or reference other words, which creates a network of this analysis. So what we say or write is influenced by and connected to the previous communication. The third one, language and social identity. So what is meant by this is that whenever people speak or write, they are, through their discourse, somehow demonstrating who they are and what their relationship is to other people. They are like enacting their identities. So it's like the way we talk to others is influenced by who they are and what our relationship is with them. And like at the same time, with our words, people also show who they are and how they are connected to others. So it is said here that when we communicate, we reveal our identity and our connection to the people we are talking to. So, in the simple terms, language um, help us helps us to express not just informations but also who we are and our relationship with them. The important thing about such identities is that they are multiple and fluid rather than singular and fixed. The identity I enact at the dance club on Friday night is not the same identity I enact at the office on Monday morning. So the reason for this is not that I change my personality in any fundamental way, but rather that I change the way I use language. So this means like our identities depends on what the event or the situation is. Like here it is said that the way they act is far different from the office on a Monday morning, in which it doesn't change them or it doesn't change who I am, but I rather use the proper language in these different settings to match the context. So language and other modes. So to fully perform various identities, it is obviously not enough to simply alter my language used when I play the role of a university professor, a yoga instructor, or a dance club diva. Additionally, I have to behave in specific ways, wear specific clothes, and specific amounts of time with specific individuals. So it is like to take on the different identities that is not just about changing how they speak, they also need to act on a certain way, in a different dress in a specific clothes, and spend time with the right people. So it means that language cannot fully express someone on a certain role, which is they have to combine it with things like the gestures, their clothing, and other actions that are associated with it. So now people are increasingly realizing not just that we communicate in a lot of ways that do not involve language, but that in order to understand what people mean when they use language, we need to pay attention to the way it is combined with these other communicative modes. So it's like realizing that communication isn't just about words and phrases. So to truly understand or to fully understand what someone means when they use language, we also need to pay attention on how they combine their words in the other ways of communicating, like the body language, the expression, or the visual cues. So it gives them the meaning, or it gives more meaning to what is being said by them. So what is good in discourse analysis? So discourse analysis can help us understand how the societies in which we live are constructed and maintained through our theory, activities of speaking, writing, and using other forms of communication, because our use of discourse is linked to our social identities and relationships. So in other words, it helps us to understand how societies are shaped through communication, as our language reflects our own identities, our communication, our connection, and relationship. It also shed lights on how people exert dominance or influence, and how we perceive our own reality. So the study of discourse analysis then is not just the study of how we use language. It also indirectly the study of romance, friendship, psychology, politics, power, and a whole lot of other things. So text and texture. Discourse analysts analyze text and conversations. But what is a text and what is a conversation? What distinguishes text and conversations from random collections of sentences and utterances? These are the questions we will take up in this section. For now, we will mostly be considering written texts. Later, we will talk more about conversations. So let's consider the following words: the milk, spaghetti, tomatoes, rocket, and light bulbs. So according to the linguist Marco Halliday, meaning is the most important thing that makes a text a text. It has to make sense. A text in this view is everything that is meaningful in a particular situation, and the basis for the meaning is choice, by Halliday in 1978, page 137. Whenever I choose one thing rather than another form from a set of alternatives, which is a yes or no, up or down, red or blue, I am making a meaning. So Halliday believes that the most important thing that makes something a text is that is has a meaning. It has a meaning. A text is anything that has meaning in a specific situation. The key to the meaning, according to him, is making choices. Like the yes or no he said earlier. The yes or no, the up or down, red or blue, which creates meaning. And historically, the study of linguistics, he points out, first involves studying the way the language was put together, which is the syntax and morphology, followed by the study of meaning. In his view, however, the reverse approach is more useful. As he puts it, a language is interpreted as a system of meanings, accompanied by forms through which the meanings can be expressed, or emphasis mind. So it was said that linguistics first focused on how language is structured, which is or the syntax and the morphology, and then studied the meaning. Then here comes Halliday. He argues that it is more helpful to approach it on the other way around. He suggests that language should be seen as a system of meanings first, with the structures like the grammar, serving as the ways to express those meanings. In other words, um, uh, the meaning comes first and then the forms follow. So one way you can begin to make sense of the list of words above is to consider them as a series of choices. In other words, I wrote milk instead of juice and spaghetti instead of linguine. So those are the list of words, no? Or the series of choices. The milk instead of the juice, the spaghetti instead of the linguine. So that these decisions are made for specific reasons. So without understanding these uh, word choices, no, without knowing the reason behind these choices or understanding the connection between these different pair of words, why milk was selected over the juice, it is difficult to analyze or to understand the list of words as a meaningful text. So these are the two pieces of misinformation now, which is the context of these word choices and the relationships between them, which form the basis for what we will be calling the texture, the quality that makes a particular set of words or sentences a text, rather than a random collection of linguistic items. So a language speaker's ability to discriminate between a random string of sentences and one forming a discourse, Halliday explains, is due to inherent texture in the language and to his awareness of it. So according to this formulation, there are two important things that make a text a text. One has to do with features inherent in the language itself. The things, for example, like grammatical rules, which help us to understand the relationship among the different words and sentences and other elements in the text. It was said no that the language features like the grammatical rules will help us to understand how words, sentences, and other elements relate to each other, which guides us in interpreting the relationship between different choices, whether they are word choice or grammatical. There are, however, two very basic things that help you to establish a connection among these words. The first is the fact that they appear in a list, they come one after another. This very fact helps us to connect them together because you automatically think that they would not have been put together in the same list if they did not have something to do with one another. So just like what I said earlier, no, that it helps to connect the words that appeared in the list, that the words are listed one after another, suggests or implies that they are related in some way, prompting us to look for a connection between them. So another internal thing here that holds these words together as a potential text is that they are similar, with the exception of light bulbs, because they share a common semantic field related to food. Words like milk and tomatoes help to infer that rocket refers to rocket lettuce or arugula, not the space kind. Although, however, the semantic connection alone isn't enough to make sense of the list as a text, since no grammatical elements are tying them together. So, in other words, they pointed out that thanks to those food related words, no, the milk and the tomatoes, we can guess that the rocket refers to a lettuce. Though the words share a common theme, which is the food, they aren't grammatically connected, so they don't quite um, form a full text on their own. And it would be much easier for us to understand the relationship among these words if they appeared in a conversation like this. So the first person says, "What do we need to get at the shop?" Then he replied, "Well, we need some milk, and I want to make a salad. So let's get some tomatoes and rocket." So rocket refers to the lettuce. And so, oh yeah, the light bulb in the living room is burnt out. We'd better get some new ones. So based on the conversation, no, the relationship between the different set of words is clearer because new words have been added. An important word that joined these words together is "and", which is an additive or it adds a relationship among them, indicating that they are part of a communicative list. And other important words like "we" and "need". So the verb "need" connects the things in the list to some kind of action that is associated with them. The word "we" connects them to some people who are also involved in this action. And so we can create the language within a sort of framework provided by these conventions. For instance, the shopping list. It serves as a framework for the content above. So with that being said, no, the shopping list, it helps us to interpret a list of words as a meaningful text, to understand the purpose of it and how to use it based on our shared knowledge and experiences. Though without prior context, we can easily comprehend the meaning and the intended use of the list. So to sum it up, the main thing that makes a text is relationship or connections. So the relationships between the text, the word, the sentences, or the part or the other elements inside the texts is a way that help it make sense. No, so this connection creates the cohesion that is mentioned. A relationship also exists between the text and the reader, where meaning comes from the reader's background, knowledge, social conventions, and the context in which the text is used. This creates the coherence. So it says that their background knowledge, no, their understanding of the norms, the context helps them to create the meaning. So the text creates the coherence, making the text feel logical and connected to the real life. And lastly, the relationship between a text and the other text that may be needed to understand it. This creates intertextuality. So it is often connected, no, to the text, whether it is from a different sources, influences, or themes. So if you guys are wondering what intertextuality means, it refers to the way in which texts reference, influence, or connect with one another. It is shaped by having a relation to other texts, the allusions, the shared themes, and the ideas. And that's all. Thank you.
Good day. I am Mortan and I will be tackling about the A3, which is the text and their social functions. So for the overview of this topic, I will be tackling about the genre and the genre analysis. Genre analysis, it is the study of social functions of different kind of text and it has different patterns of texture and are associated with different types of text. It is to understand something about the people who produce and consume it and what they are doing with it. So we will be tackling what is a genre. So genre in discourse analysis isn't just about like the genre of a movie or a genre of a music, but The genre in discourse analysis goes beyond examining the conventional structures and features of different kinds of text to asking what these structures and features can tell us about the people who use the text and what they are using them to do. So in this genre, we will be defining like how the text is used and how the consumer and how the user tend to communicate through this genre. In his book analyzing genre, Vijay Bhatia, drawing on the work of John Swales, defines genre as follows. The genre is a recognizable communicative event characterized by a set of communicative purposes identified and mutually understood by members of the community in which it occurs. So, for example, in a classroom setting, when we use a PowerPoint presentation, which is the type of text in this field, so um, the teacher tend to present the lessons through proper PowerPoint presentations, and the learners tend to learn from the PowerPoint presentation. So that is the genre in that field. The type of text that they are using is the PowerPoint presentation. So most often it is highly structured and conventionalized with constraints on allowable contributions in terms of their intent, positioning, form, and functional value. These constraints, however, are often exploited by expert members of the discourse community to achieve private intentions within the framework of the socially recognized purposes. So the experts, they have rules on how to use this genre. They have limitations and constraints on how to use this um, genre in that specific field. There are three important aspects to this definition which need to be further explained. So first now is the genres are not defined as type of text but rather as types of communicative events. So isn't just what we expect in a type of text, but also it is how you expect the people in this field will communicate with each other. So they use this type of text and certain communication in order to understand each other. Second, these events are characterized by constraints on what can and cannot be done with them. So this is all about the rules. And third, that experts users often exploit these constraints in creative and unexpected ways. So when we say a genre in a movie, so sometimes we expect that the movie will be a comedy based on its title. But also, sometimes when we watch the actual movie, we tend to see that isn't just about a comedy or about laughter, but also we can see that there are drama or there are also love story in that movie. So that is what we say that creative and unexpected ways of exploiting a genre. Next is genres or communicative events. While it might seem unusual to refer to spoken genres like conversations and debates and political speeches as events, thinking of written texts like newspaper articles, recipes, and job applications letters as events might first seem rather strange. So, um, these genres aren't just like type of text or conversations, but we tend to express them as events because um, it is how things are done or how the authors want you to do something. Like for example, in a newspaper, they want to inform you something. So they are doing something with that type of text or that type of conversation. Also, in sharing a recipe, they are instructing you how to do something. So they are doing something, right? And a newspaper a newspaper article is an instance of someone informing someone else about some recent event. So that alone isn't just 'cause- isn't is not just about conversing or using a type of text, but also it is doing something. It is um, informing you about something. So it is often referred to as an event. Conventions and constraints. Genres therefore come with built-in constraints as to what kinds of things they can include and what kinds of things they cannot, based on the activity they are trying to accomplish. For example, in sharing a recipe, when you are sharing a recipe of a brownie, you tend to instruct how to bake, right? But you don't have to say that you're also good at gymnastics, or you're also good at building house. So that is the constraint. That is the constraint in the type of text. That is the constraint and the limitation of sharing a brownie or a recipe of a brownie. It's just only limits there. Creativity, as the directors of the hybrid films described above can tell us, often the most successful texts are those which break the rules, so defy conventions and push the boundaries of constraints. So when we say creativity, for example, in a movie, we have the plot twist, or as I've said earlier, that comedy movies aren't just comedy, but also it has a mix of a love story or a mix of a moral lessons which tend to twist the movie. Is it gives the idea that that movie isn't just about this thing, but also it has the creativity to push further, to mix something that will add to the twist or the creativity of that movie. So, expert producers of text, for example, sometimes mix different kinds of text together or embed one genre into another. So, being able to successfully bend and blend genres is very much a marker of expertise. In order to break the rules effectively, you must be also able to show that you have mastered the rules. Discourse communities. So it should be clear by now that at the center of the concept of genre is the idea of belonging. So genres are always associated with certain groups of people that have certain common goals and common ways of reaching these goals. So, for example, the doctors use medical charts and prescriptions to do the work of curing people. Solicitors use contracts and legal briefs to defend people's rights. And as a student, you and your teachers use things like textbooks, handout, PowerPoint presentation, and examinations to accomplish the task of teaching and learning. So in the discourse communities, it is genre is all about belonging or communicating with people with uh, the same field as you. So for the next topic, we have the discourse and an ideology. This is under the A4. So in this section, we will examine how text promotes certain points of view or versions of reality. So we will focus on four things. First is the way authors create versions of reality based on their choice of words and how they combine words together. Next is the ways authors construct certain kinds of relationships between themselves and the readers. So we have different kinds of relationships which will be tackled later. Next is the ways authors appropriate the words of other people and how they represent those words. So we have here the ideologies and also how we communicate these words is affecting the way we view the reality. The way next for the fourth one is the way authors of text draw upon and reinforce the larger systems of belief and knowledge that govern what counts as right or wrong, good or bad, and normal or abnormal in popular society. Systems which we refer to as capital D discourses. So what we mean by ideology is a specific set of beliefs and assumptions people have about things like what is good and bad. So the example of the book for this is when we say, when the governor say, you may now, you, I now pronounce you as man and wife. So when we say man and wife, the man has the sense of individuality, while the wife is like he belongs to the man. So that often strike a perspective that the man is a independent being, while the wife is often connected to the man. So on the other hand, ideologies is also limit the way we look at reality and tend to marginalize or exclude altogether people, things, and ideas that do not fit into these models. So who's doing what? The linguist Michael Holliday, 1994, pointed out that whenever we use language, we are always doing three things at once. We are in some way representing the world, which he called the ideational function of language. So this is the first one. This is how we have the set of beliefs or what we believe the good and the bad. And then next is we are creating, ratifying, or negotiating our relationships with the people with whom we are sorry, which he called the interpersonal function of language. It based on who we are communicating or the language that we are using with that people. So, and we are joining sentences and the ideas together in particular ways to form cohesive and coherent text, which he called the textual function of language. So, in the last topic, we tackled about the textual function of language, right? So, next is according to Holiday, we represent the world through language by choosing words that represent people, things, or concepts and words about what these participants are doing too, with or for one another processes. All text contains these two elements, the participants and the processes. So in the earlier example, the man and the wife. So when we say when we choose this version, we tend to limit the role of the bride with to limit the role of the wife, which we can freely instead we can say that I now pronounce you as husband and wife, in which they are having a sense of individuality, or they have the sense of equality with each other. So the words we use for processes and how we use them, like the link participants or together, can also create different impressions of what is going on. One of the key things about processes is that they always construct a certain kind of relationship between participants. So we much rather say husband and wife because it creates a sense of equality, right? So Holiday calls this relationship transitivity. So, relationships. Another important way texts promote ideology is in the relationships they create between the people who are communicating and between communicators and what they are communicating about. So, what Halliday calls the interpersonal function of language. So, for example, when you are communicating with your family or versus when you're communicating with your boss. So, when we are communicating with your family, it doesn't have this sense of formality, right? Versus when you're communicating with your boss, you have to use like different kind of communication, like you have to use a sense of more formal respect instead of the respect that you give to your family. We construct relationships through words we choose to express things like certainty and application, known as the system of modality and a language. Holiday is more likely to see degrees of formality in language as a matter of what he calls register. So the different ways we use language in different situations, depending on the topic we're communicating about, the people with whom we are communicating, and the channel through which we are communicating, like the formal writing, instant messaging, sorry, face-to-face conversation. Like genres, social language or registers tend to link us to different groups and communicate that we are certain kinds of people. So the relationships also tend to build you a sense of reality. Like, for example, when you're communicating with your boss through an email, you tend to be more formal, more specific, and I not specific, but you have to explain your purpose of messaging. Unlike when you are communicating with your family, you don't really have to communicate through an email, but rather you can just directly message them. Sorry, you can just message them with a simple text or a simple sentence, unlike with your boss. So, next is the intertextuality. As we have mentioned before, texts often refer to or somehow depend for their meaning on their text. We call the relationships text create with other text intertextuality, and intertextuality is another important way ideologies are promoted in discourse. So, according to Bakhtin, all texts involve some degree of intertextuality, so we cannot speak or write, he argues, without borrowing the words and ideas of other people, and nearly everything we say or write is in some way a response to some previous utterance or text, an anticipation of some future one. So, intertextuality is all about how we tend to have an idea of a previous discussion before or a previous text before, and we tend to um, analyze it and tend to refer to it. Like, for example, in the previous, we used to call it the man and wife, right? But when we analyze it, it was rather unequal or doesn't distribute a fair what we call this, a fair term to each of the husband and wife. So now we are calling them husband and wife discourses. It should be quite clear by now that even a seemingly innocent phrase like you may now kiss the bride can be seen as ideological. That is to say, it promotes what she calls a set of frozen theories or generalizations about the world. In this case, generalizations about brides and grooms and men and women, how they are supposed to act in the context of marriage. So, in this, you may now kiss the bride. It often seen as the groom as in charge of that event, like he is in charge of kissing the bride. It um it creates the ideology that the man is like the in charge of the marriage, which is in fact doesn't really apply to all. So cultural models are not random and free floating. They are parts of larger systems of knowledge, values, and social relationships that grow up within societies and cultures, which G calls the capital T discourses. So the French philosopher Michael Foucault calls the systems orders of discourse and gives us examples things like clinical discourse, economic discourse, the discourse of natural history, and psychiatric discourse. So when we say clinical discourse, these are the terms which is used inside a hospital or between a patient and a doctor. So like in the economic discourse is how we talk about money and social status and etc. So, according to Foucault, discourses can exert a tremendous power over us by creating constraints regarding how certain things can be talked about and what counts as knowledge in particular context. So, at the same time, it is also important to remember that discourses are I'm sorry, complex and often contain internal contradictions. So discourses have their creativity and their different twists, or discourses have doesn't just, although it has the constraints on how we use it, but also we tend to bend and blend these discourses to create a creative way of communicating with each other. So that would be all today for my report. Thank you.
Today I'll be discussing the concept of spoken discourse as explored in section A5 of our study. Spoken discourse refers to the way conversations are structured and how people use language in everyday speech, unlike written text. Spoken discourse is a dynamic and shaped by real time interactions. One of the key elements in spoken discourse is how speakers manage the flow of conversations, such as taking turns, using pauses, and adjusting their tone or intonation. For example, when we engage in a conversation, we we don't just speak randomly. We take turns, listen actively, and use pauses to give others a chance to respond. This organization help make the interaction smooth and meaningful. Additionally, the social context of a conversation plays a huge role in shaping what we say or how we say it. Our language changes depending on whether we're speaking to a friend, a teacher, or a colleague. By analyzing spoken discourse, we can understand how people express meaning, emotions, and their social identities through their speech. It shows us how language works in real world to build relationships and convey ideas effectively. And now let's proceed to strategic interaction. And this refers to the purposeful ways in which people manage their roles and relationships during communication. In any conversation, individuals don't just speak randomly. They use specific strategies to achieve their goals. For example, when making a request, offering an apology, or even making a suggestion. We're strategically choosing the right words and tone to influence the outcome of the conversation. And these strategies are influenced by the social context of the interactions. For instance, the way we communicate with a friend might differ from how we speak to a teacher or a boss. Understanding strategic interaction help us to see how people adjust their language to fit the roles they're playing, whether they're a student, a friend, or a colleague. By analyzing how these strategies work, we can understand how individuals navigate power dynamics, negotiate identities, and maintain social connections and through their communication. And that's it for this video. Thank you so much, guys, for listening. And that's it. Goodbye.
The concept of context and discourse analysis encompasses the various circumstances that influence the production and interpretation of spoken language. This involves not just the immediate setting of conversation, but also broader cultural norms and expectations. Bronislaw Malinowski is one of the person who emphasized the importance of situational context in meaning making. Also, Firth suggested that context can be broken down into three aspects, which is the character of participants, the relevant objects in the situation, and last, the effects or verbal action. Another influential figure is Dwell Himmer, who developed a more comprehensive model, includes 8 elements represented by the acronym, which is speaking. The discussion of context lead to the importance of ethnography, which means it is approach allow researchers to engage with participants in their natural setting. In conclusion, the understanding of context in communication requires a multifaceted approach that considers both objective characteristic and subjective cultural knowledge relevant to the participants and discourse. And this section discusses the concept of mediated discourse analysis or MDA, which is emphasizing approach to understanding discourse and relation to social action and practices. And it also focuses on actions and how discourse mediates these actions. And it emphasizes that discourse is everywhere, with various texts and conversation influencing social situation. Um, mediate, Mediated discourse analysis or MDA highlights the actions are interconnected and often depend on a sequence of smaller actions forming larger social practices. These social practices are habitual pattern of behavior shaped by discourse. MDA or mediated discourse analysis is particularly interested in how discourse contributes to the establishment and perpetuation of these practices and social identities according to what James Paul Glee calls discourse with a capital D. Ultimately, the focus of MDA is on understanding the relationship between discourse and action, investigating the ideological dimension of how language and other cultural tools create and sustain practices that influence individuals' behavior and identities in various contexts.
Good day, everyone. I am Crystal May Rojas, and my topic for today is all about multimodal discourse analysis. So, as we can see here, that multimodal discourse analysis expands the study of discourse beyond just language to include various modes of communication like gestures, images, music, and even architectural design. So, it argues that understanding discourse requires looking at how these different modes interact and work together. Number one is mode of communication. So a mode is a system for making meaning like speech, writing, gestures, and colors. So number two is integrated analysis. So it emphasizes that all discourse involve multiple modes and their relationship rather than isolating one mode at a time. So number three is influential approaches. So there are two, which is the systematic functional grammar. So it explores how different modes have their own grammar that structures meaning like for example, Chris and Van Leeuwen's work on a visual design. So then next is the multimodal interaction analysis. So it looks at how modes plays a role in social interactions and how various activities are managed simultaneously. So number four is resemotization. So as a communicator, switch from one mode or medium to another. For example, from text to spoken conversation. So the meaning can change. So number five is changing nature of text and conversation. So new media blur the lines between traditional notions of what constitutes a text or conversation. So for example, an entire website can be viewed the text due through interconnections, and conversations often span multiple formats and modes. Overall, MDA highlights the importance of studying all communicative modes in conjunction, acknowledging that the meaning is shaped by their interaction. By understanding this relationship, analysts can gain deeper insight into how people communicate in various contexts. So, multimodal discourse analysis looks at how we communicate not just through words but also through actions, images, and other forms. So, it shows how different ways of communicating can work together to create meaning. For example, in a conversation, how we gesture, look at each other, or even the setting can change how what we say is understood. So, multimodal discourse analysis help us to understand this interaction and is important because as we use more media like testing or social media, the way we create and share meaning is also changing. So next is corpus assisted discourse analysis. So corpus assisted discourse analysis or CADA is a methodology that enables researchers to analyze discourse on a larger scale by utilizing computer-based corpora. So this approach allows for the examination of numerous texts or interactions, which they can provide a more objective basis for testing theories derived from close analysis of smaller samples. So, corpus assisted discourse analysis or CADA allows researchers to look at patterns in language across many texts instead of just a few. By using computer programs to analyze large collections of text or corpora, CADA helps identify broad trends and recurring themes in how language is used, which can reveal underlying ideologies or discourses. However, this method doesn't fully replace the needs of to understand the social context in which the language is used, since some meanings depend heavily on context. Thus, it is important to combine computer analysis with traditional techniques for a complete understanding. So, CADA can be applied alongside various of theoretical frameworks, making it versatile tool in discourse analysis. So that would be all. Thank you.
Good day, everyone. My name is Haidelupi Sarne, and I am the next reporter.
Let us now move on to our next topic. We are now in section B, the development approaches to discourse analysis. So, over the years, people have approached the study of discourse in many different ways. And throughout this topic, we will explore some of these ways of analyzing discourse and practice applying them to text and conversations from our own lives. So, for now, it is enough to say that people who analyze discourse have basically gone about it from three different perspectives based on three different definitions of what discourse is. Okay. So, there are three ways of looking at discourse. So the first one is the formal approach, the functional approach, and the social approach. Okay, so formal approach, when we say formal approach, it is defined as language above the level of the clause or sentence. So those working from this definition often try to understand the kinds of rules and conventions that govern the ways we join clauses and sentences together to make text. Okay, so the next one is the functional approach. So when we say functional approach, this is defined as language in use. So this definition leads to questions about how people use language to do things like make requests, issue warnings, and apologize in different kinds of situations, and how we interpret what other people are trying to do when they speak or write. Okay, so the last one is the social approach. And we say social approach, it is defining discourse as a kind of social practice. So what does it mean? So it means that the way we use language is tied up with the way we construct different social identities and relationships and participate in different kinds of groups and institutions. So it is tied up with issues of what we believe to be right and wrong. So who has power over whom, and what we have to do and to say to fit into our societies in different ways. So although these three different approaches to discourse are often treated as separate and are certainly associated with different historical traditions and different individual discourse and analysts, the position we will be taking in this topic rather, is that good discourse analysis requires that we take into account all three of these perspectives. Okay, so always remember that. So, instead of three separate definitions of discourse, they are better seen as three interrelated aspects of discourse. So, the way people use language cannot really be separated from the way it is put together, and the way people use language to show who they are and what they believe cannot be separated from the things that people are using language to do in particular situations. Okay, so the next is language above the clause. So, the use of the term discourse to mean language above the level of the sentence or the clause probably originated with the linguist Zelig Harris. Okay, so Zelig Harris in 1950 introduced discourse analysis. Okay? So, back in 1950s, no, he wanted to take the study of linguistics to a new level. Before this, linguists had come a long way understanding how the sounds are put together to form words and how words are put together to form sentences. So what Harris wanted to do was to understand how sentences are put together to form text. Okay, so the idea that text could be analyzed in terms their formal structure was actually very popular in the early and mid 20th century. So even before Harris invented the term discourse analysis, especially in the field of literature, one group of literary critics called the Russian formalists, so the Russian formalists, for example, not tried to apply the same kinds of methods people used to analyze the grammar of sentences to analyzing stories and novels. So the most famous was Vladimir Prop, who tried to come up with the grammar of stories by studying Russian folk tales. Okay, so um, so Harris, he has a method, no, which is he called it distributional analysis. So the method that Harris proposed for the analysis of discourse, no, he called it the distributional analysis. So it is not much different from how people go about doing grammatical analysis. So the idea was to identify particular linguistic features and determine how they occurred in text relative to other features. That is, which features occurred next to other features or in the same environment with them. Okay, so however, as you will see, no, from the excerpt from Harry's seminal paper printed in section D1, his ambitions went beyond simply understanding how linguistic features are distributed throughout the text. So he was also interested in features. Oh, section D1 is not yet ano. Okay, so going back, no, his ambitions went beyond simply understanding how linguistic features are distributed through throughout throughout text. So he was also interested in understanding how these features correlate with non-linguistic behavior beyond text. That is how form the text take is related to the social situations in which they occur. It was really left to discourse analysts who came after him. However, to figure out exactly how the relationship between text and the social context in which they are used could be fruitfully studied. So, when focusing on the formal aspect of discourse, we are mostly interested in the how the different elements of text or conversations are put together to form unified wholes. So in this respect, we usually look for two kinds of things. We look for linguistic features, words and grammar, which help to link different parts of the text or conversation together. And we look at the overall pattern of the text or conversation, as we said in section A2, no, as what the previous reporter have tackled. So we can refer to these two things. So one is the cohesion. Okay, next slide. So one is the cohesion, and the second is the coherence. So when we say cohesion, it means how different parts of a text are linked together using linguistic tools like grammar or specific words. So for example, no, repeated phrases of connecting words like and, but, or because. So when we say coherence, it is about overall structures or flow of the text. It looks at whether the text makes sense as a whole and matches our expectations for a certain type of text, no, like a story, an essay, or a conversation. So yeah, um this topic will be farther tackled in the next chapter. Okay. So language in use. So the second aspect of discourse that discourse analysts focus on is how people actually use language to get things done in specific context. So in fact, no, as was pointed out in section A1, no, um, section A1, it is often very difficult to understand what a piece of language means without referring to the social context, right? So, in which it is being used and what that person who is using is trying to do. So, this view of discourse the grew out of the work of a number of important scholars, including including Michael Halliday, whose approach to the study of grammar differed markedly from earlier approaches by focusing less on the forms language takes and more on the social functions and accomplished by language, and the work of the British philosophers John L. Austin and Paul Grice or Grice. Okay, so Michael Halliday, no, he studied the functions of language. So just John L. Augustine and Paul Grice or Grice, well, ha, Paul Grice or Grice developed the pragmatics or the language as action. So they laid the foundation for what we call pragmatics, no? When we say pragmatics, it is the study of how people do things with language. Okay, so another important figure who promoted this view of discourse is the applied linguist H.D. Widdowson. So H.G. Widdowson, no, um, who's approached who approached the whole problem of language use from the perspective of language learning, noting that learning a foreign language requires more than just learning how to make grammatical sentences. So it also involves being able to use language to accomplish things in the world. Okay, so um there are there are a number of ways to study language in use, no? So one way is to consider discourse itself as a kind of action and to explore how when we say things or write things, we're actually doing things like apologizing, promising, threatening, or making requests. Okay, so that is language as action. So, another way to consider language in use is to explore the role of discourse in certain kinds of activities and to examine how different kinds of discourse make certain kinds of actions or activities either easier or more difficult to perform. Okay, so the last one is we might consider how people use discourse strategically to try to communicate their interpretation of a situation or to manage the relationship with the people with whom they are communicating. Okay, so next one is the language and social practice. Okay, so the language and the social practice, no, it is a language is a part of larger system that shapes social identities, beliefs, and power dynamics. Okay, so the third aspect the third aspect of this course has to do with the role of language in social practice. No, like what I have said earlier, language is seen not just as a system or making meaning, but as a part of larger systems through which people construct social identities and social realities. So different people use language in different ways. An English teacher talks differently than a hip hop artist. And these different ways of talking help to show who we are and also reflect our different ideas about the world, different beliefs, and different values. So, this view of discourse probably owes the most to the French philosopher Michael Foucault. So, uh, Michael Foucault, no, he argued that the discourse is the main tool through which we construct knowledge and exert power over other people. So different kinds of discourse or discourses are associated with different kinds of people and different systems of knowledge. So also Foucault no said or spoke according to him, um, for example, of clinical discourse, economic discourse, the discourse of natural history, and psychiatric discourse. Okay, so the American discourse analyst we have talked about, for him, no, for Foucault, discourses are ways of being in the world or forms of life which integrate words, act, values, beliefs, attitudes, and social identities. Okay, so this aspect of discourse now leads us to explore how people use language to advance certain versions of reality and certain relationships of power, and also how our beliefs, values, and social institutions are constructed through and supported by discourse. So, a central principle of this view of discourse is that is that uh, discourse is always ideological. So, meaning when we say ideological, discourse always has an agenda that is always end up serving the interest of certain people over those of others. Okay. This is the last slide. So as we stated above, no, as we as we stated earlier, no, it is difficult to look at discourse in any meaningful way from only one of these perspectives. So simply looking at how texts are put together, for example, while it may be interesting has limited practical value at ideology. At the same time, you cannot really make broad statements about power or ideology in a text without first understanding some basic things about how the text is put together and how people are actually using it in specific social contexts to perform specific actions. So that's the end of the B1. Let us now again move on to the next reporter.
Cohesion and coherence. Earlier, we said that one of the most basic tasks for discourse analysis is to filter out what makes a text and what makes conversation and conversation. In other words, to figure out what gives text and conversations texture. Texture, we said, comes from cohesion and coherence. Cohesion primarily has to do with the linguistic features in the text, and coherence has to do with the kind of framework with which the reader approaches the text and what he or she wants to use the text to do. For example, if I were say, Lady Gaga doesn't appeal to me, but my sister loves her. In order to understand the meaning of her in the second clause, you have to do some mental work. Not only do you need to refer back to the first clause, you also have to be smart enough to know that her refers to Lady Gaga and not my sister. Thus, cohesion is the quality in a text that forces you to look either backward or forward in the text that in order to make sense of the things you read. And through the acts of looking backward and forward, the text takes on a quality of connectedness. Cohesion. Halida and Hassan, whose work is excerpted in section D2, describe two broad kinds of linguistic devices that are used to force readers to engage in the process of backward and forward looking, which gives them a sense of connectedness in the text. One type depends on grammar, which they call grammatical cohesion, and the other type depends more on the meaning of words, which they call lexical cohesion. These are devices used to create grammatical cohesion, include first, conjunction, using connecting words; reference, using a pronoun to refer to another word; substitution, substituting one word or phrase for another word or phrase; ellipses, leaving something out. Lexical cohesion involves the repetition of words or of words from the same semantic fields. For example, milk, tomatoes, rocket. Conjunction refers to the use of various connecting words, such as conjunction like and but, and conjunctive adverbs like furthermore and however, to join together clauses and sentences. Conjunction causes the reader to look back to the first clause in a pair of joined clauses to make sense of the second clause. The important thing about these connecting words is that they do not just establish a relationship between the two clauses, but that they tell us what kind of relationship it is. In the two examples below, the first uses a contrastive connective, and second uses a causative connective. Coherence. As the shopping list we discussed in section A2 illustrates what makes a text, is often as much a matter of the interpretative framework that the reader brings to the text as it is of anything internal to the text. The relationship between the words tomatoes and rocket becomes meaningful to a reader based on his or her understanding of what a shopping list is and what it is used for. This aspect of texture is known as coherence, and it has no to do with our expectations about the way elements in a text ought to be organized and the kinds of social actions like shopping that are associated with a given text. Interpretative frameworks help us understand text by shaping our expectations about their structure, content, and presentation. One such framework is a generic framework, which relies on our knowledge and typical text types and their predictable patterns. For example, texts often follow logical sequences, such as the problem-to-solution pattern, which first introduces a problem and their present solutions. This principle stems from cognitive science and early artificial intelligence research by scholars like Skunk and Abelson, who identified procedural scripts, and Rumelhart, who describes narrative structures as schemas based on predictable sequences of actions and informations. The important thing to remember about cultural models, and for that matter generic frameworks, is that they are cultural. In other words, they reflect the beliefs and values of a particular group of people in a particular place at a particular point in history. The ad reprinted above would be totally incomprehensible for people in many societies outside of our own because they would not share either the knowledge of before and after ads or the beliefs about physical attractiveness that we have. It is even more important to remember that such texts do not just reflect such expectations, values, and beliefs, but also reinforce them. Every time we encounter a text like the one above, These generic frameworks and cultural models and the habitual ways of looking at the world associated with them are strengthened.
Good afternoon everyone, my name is Dana Camarista and today I will discuss about the constructing reality. But before I proceed, let me remind you what is constructing reality first. So, constructing reality refers to the way texts represent the world by selecting and organizing language to present specific versions of events, relationships, or ideas. Authors do this by choosing certain participants like people, objects, or concepts and linking them through processes like actions, states, or relationships. This creates a particular interpretation of reality which may support certain ideologies or perspectives. So let's proceed to the next slide. We can see here the participants and processes. So participants, these are the people, things, or concepts involved in a text. And the processes are actions, states, or relationships between participants. So let's proceed to the next slide. So we have here the types of processes. The types of processes are material processes. It is an action and events. Mental processes, thoughts and feelings. Relational processes, states of being or having. Verbal processes, acts of saying or writing. Let's proceed to the next slide. So we have here the nominalization. So a process is turned into a noun which is the participant to simplify or to formalize language, often in technical or academic contexts. So for an example, eating ice cream is a process, but it becomes participant in the sentence. Eating ice cream caused my divorce, making it easier to discuss abstract relationships. So in the next slide, we can see here the examples of how participants and processes can be combined in texts to create certain versions of reality that can be found in the warning labels that most governments require appear on cigarette packets. When the US government initially implemented these rules in 1966, there was intense debate between lawmakers and tobacco firms, who at that time still held significant sway over the government's phrasing of the warnings. So in the United States, the earliest warning labels on cigarettes said, "Caution, cigarette smoking may be hazardous to your health." So here, the process type used is relational to be, linking the nominalized process of smoking cigarettes to a possible attribute, which is hazardousness. This link is weakened by the use of the modal verb may, which reduces the certainty of the statement. One can almost hear the voice of the government competing with the voice of the tobacco companies in this statement. The one working to claim that cigarette smoking is risky, and the other working to undermine this claim. In 1970, the U.S. Congress passed new legislation which revised the warning. Now it is no. In year 1970, it was revised warning. The Surgeon General has determined that cigarette smoking is dangerous to your health. The first difference we can notice about this statement is the statement has shifted from caution to a warning, emphasizing seriousness. The focus has changed from cigarette smoking to the Surgeon General, who is now the authority determining the danger. The language has been strengthened with dangerous replacing hazardous and is replacing maybe. However, the risk of smoking has been subordinated, with the Surgeon General's determination becoming the main clause. In 1985, the warning was revised again. Surgeon General's warning: smoking causes lung cancer, heart disease, emphysema, and may complicate pregnancy. Here, the main participants is once again the nominalized process smoking. But a new process has been introduced. The focus shifts back to smoking as the main participant, now linked to a clear cause and effect relationship with serious diseases like lung cancer, heart disease, and emphysema. However, its connection to pregnancy is less certain. The modal verb may weakens the claim, and the vague causative process complicate leaves the implications unclear. So let's proceed to the next slide. Cigarettes warning in the US, where major tobacco companies are based, typically describes cigarettes as having harmful attributes or relationships rather than actively doing harm. Even the term cause focuses on the relationship between events rather than direct action. In contrast, warnings in other countries, such as Australia, often use active language to emphasize cigarettes' harmful actions. For example, we have our examples here. So, smoking harms unborn babies. Here, smoking is portrayed as doing something harming to someone, which is the unborn babies. Similarly, since 2003, cigarettes in the European Union have carried warnings like smoking seriously harms you and others around you. Smoking while pregnant harms your child. And the direct and unambiguous statement, smoking kills. So let's proceed to the next slide, constructing a relationship. Constructing reality involves not only describing events, but also building a relationship with the audience and conveying the significance of those events. For instance, using modal verbs like may and cigarette smoking may be hazardous to your health introduces uncertainty, shaping how the reader perceives the statement. Authors can also connect with the readers through pronouns like you and we. For example, using your. Cigarette smoking may be hazardous to your health. Makes the danger personally relevant. Similarly, the phrase smoking seriously harms you and others around you directly involves the reader in the harm and emphasizes social responsibility by suggesting concern for both personal and others' well-being. A strong example of this technique is seen in the Australian warning label. The label says, "Protect children, don't make them breathe your smoke." So we have here the example of social languages. Number 1, smoking when pregnant harms your baby. Number 2, Surgeon General's warning, smoking by pregnant women may result in fetal injury, premature birth, and low birth weight. To understand how people interpret texts and how ideologies are embedded in them, it's important to look beyond the texts themselves. This involves analyzing discourse practices, how authors create texts, and how readers interpret them, and social practices, which include the activities, norms, and relationships that shape readers' social worlds, with ethnographic methods such as interviews, observations, and historical research. So that's all for my part. Thank you for listening.
So hello, good afternoon everyone. So today I'm going to discuss about the B3, all the right moves. So before I start, let me introduce myself first. I am Jessel Jane A. Romares. So, okay, now let's start. So, if we say all the right moves, these are all about texts that are structured according to particular generic frameworks are called genre. But as we note in section A3, genre are more than just texts. They are means by which people get things done. And the way they are structured depends crucially on what the particular people using a genre want or need to do. In other words, what determines the way a particular genre is put together is its communicative purpose. And so this must be our central focusing in analyzing genre. So that is all about all the right moves. And the next one is, so the John Wallace is the father of genre analysis. He illustrated the idea of moves in his analysis of introduction to academic articles. Instead of asking the traditional question, how is this text structured? Wallace asks, what do writers of such texts need to do in order to achieve their desired purpose? Which in the case of an introduction to an academic article is mainly getting people to believe that the article is worth reading. Wallace identified four most characteristic of such text. An introduction to an academic article, he said typically. So the first foremost characteristics base of Wallace is the establishes the field in which the writer of the study is working. And the second and the third, create a research space or interpretive space for the present study by indicating a gap in the current knowledge or by raising questions, and introduce the study by indicating what the investigation being reported will accomplish for the field. Furthermore, the ways these moves are realized might be very different for articles about engineering and articles about English literature. The point that Wallace was trying to make, however, wasn't that these moves are universal or in some way obligatory. Creatively float these conventions. Next slide. So here is, this is all about Copland 1996-87. Advertisements like this tend to consist of 5 moves. The first is the advertiser describes himself or herself. That is called sensual imaginative. Number 2, the advertiser describes the kind of person he or she is looking for, seeking tall, strong, intelligent. And then number 3, the advertiser describes the kind of relationship or activities he or she wishes to engage in with the target for passionate loving romance. Next is, so we have the next topic, and that is bending and blending. So if we say bending and blending, that is despite the stylistic variety in personal advertisements among different discourse communities, this genre nevertheless remains very conventionalized, with fairly strict constraint on what is considered a relevant contribution. Advertiser must describe themselves, describe the kind of they are seeking, and describe the kind of relationship they want to have. Ironically, however, the strongly conventionalist nature of this genre, the fact that nearly all examples of it have more or less the same structure, has the potential to work against the overall communication purpose, which is attracting the attention of interested and interesting readers. Okay, next is again, this is bending and blending. The next one is modes, media, and context. So if you say modes, media, and context, that is refer of a number of other important factors determine how genre are used, and how they change. One which we deal with in the more detail in a later section, A9 and B9, has to do with the different modes, writing, graphics, video, that are available for constructing the genre. Another, which we will discuss in section B8, has to do with the media through which genres are produced and distributed. Both of these factors are important in relation to the genre we have been discussing. Um, this modes and media and context, no, that is very important to in relation of the genre to make a poem that are perfect. So that is how important the modes, media, and context. And is given the fact that recently this genre has to a large extent been migrated online. And then finally, with the development of mobile technologies, users of such genre can access them anywhere through their mobile phones and use GPS tools to search for suitable partners within a certain radius of their present location. The point is that the genre is inevitably change, either because the communicative goals of users change or because technologies for the production or distribution of text introduce new, more efficient ways of fulfilling old communicative goals. So that's all, everyone. That's all of my part, and thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. I am Kizaya Sabala, and my topic is about the texture of talk. So the texture of talk, in our analysis of how people make sense of written text, we introduce the concept of texture. So texture, we said, basically comes from the two things. The first is the ways different parts of a text are related to one another, and the various expectations that people have about text. So when we say the ways different parts of a text are related to one another means that every text has different sections or elements, such as sentences, paragraphs, or ideas. The way these parts are connected or related creates a sense of flow and coherence within the text. So for example, in a story, the introduction, body, and conclusion are structured in a way that leads the reader from one idea to the next, building a logical progression that helps make sense of the overall message. And the next is when we say various expectations that people have about text, means that the readers or listeners have certain expectation or prior knowledge that influence how they interpret a text. These expectations are shaped by cultural norms, personal experiences, and the context which is the text is encountered. So for instance, when reading a formal report, people expect it to follow a logical and organized format. If it doesn't, it may cause confusion. Similarly, when reading a novel, the reader expects narrative elements like characters, setting, and plot to develop in a particular way. So, making sense of conversation also involves these two aspects of communication. So, the first is the structure and patterning of the communication, and the other one is the broader expectation about meaning and human behavior that participants bring to it. So the first is the structure and patterning of the communication, means that the way the conversation is organized. Just like in written text, conversation have a structure, how people take turns speaking, how topics are introduced and developed, and how information is exchanged. So, another example of this could be one person may ask a question and the other person responds. This back and forth pattern helps the conversation flow and makes it easier to understand. The next one is the broader expectation about meaning and human behavior that participants bring to it. So it means that this aspect involves the assumption and social rules that participants bring to the conversation. Each person enters the conversation with expectation about how the other will behave based on shared cultural norms, experiences, and social context. And another example of this could be if two people are having a formal conversation, they might expect to use polite language and avoid interruptions. If the conversation is informal, they might expect to speak more casually and share personal opinions. So, making sense of conversation involves not only understanding how the conversation is organized, but also considering the social and cultural expectation the participants have about to behave and what other words or action mean. And both of these could work together to help us interpret the conversation correctly. So, generally speaking, conversation analysis focuses more on the first aspect, and pragmatics focuses more on the second. And the basis of pragmatics is the idea that people enter into conversation with the assumption that the people they are conversing with will behave in a logical way. So, there is a philosopher, the philosopher Herbert Paul Grice called this assumption the cooperative principle. So, it means that when people engage in conversation, he said they do so with the idea that will. So, just like this in this text, that make conversational contributions such as is required at a stage at which is it occurs by the accepted purpose or direction of the talk exchange in which you are engaged. So what he meant by this was that when people talk with each other, they generally cooperate in making their utterances understandable by conforming to what they believe to be the other person's expectation about how people usually behave in conversation. So most people, he said, have four main expectations about conversational behavior. So the four main expectations about conversational behavior is first, that what people say will be true. It is called the maxim of quality. And the second is that what people say will be relevant to the topic or under discussion. It's called the maxim of relevance. Third is the people who try to make what they mean clear and unambiguous. It calls the maxim of manner. And the last one is the people will say as much they need to say to express their meaning and not say more that they need to say, the maxim of quantity. So when we say maxim of quality, in conversation, we expect that others will provide information that is honest and accurate unless they indicate otherwise, like joking or exaggerating. And second is maxim of relevance. So this we expect that people will stay on topic and offer information that directly relates to what is being discussed. The third one is maxim of manner. In this part, we expect that others will communicate their ideas in a way that minimizes confusion, meaning they will avoid being ambiguous and will try to be as straightforward as possible. And the last one is maxim of quantity. Means that we expect that others will say just enough to convey their meaning. Too little information leaves things unclear, and too much can be overwhelming or unnecessary. So according to Gray, his concept of maxims are not rules. These principles are general guidelines that people tend to follow, but they are not mandatory rules. So according to Grace, when people do not follow these maxims, it is often intentional, and it creates additional meaning. This is known as implicator, which is implicator means that the idea of suggesting something without explicitly stating it. For example, if someone says, "It's getting late," they might be implying that it's time to leave, even though they didn't directly say so. So that's what Grace's concept about maxims. So the next topic is about performative acts by John Austin. A philosopher, John Austin, pointed out that certain utterances, when they are spoken, have the effect of actually performing some action in the physical world. So when the officiant at wedding ceremony, for example, says, "I now pronounce you husband and wife," so it means that this is not simply convey information, but actually perform an action in the world when spoken. So just like I now pronounce you husband and wife, the act of saying those words makes the couple legally married. So another statement, just like a judge statement, "I sentence you to 5 years in prison." This has the effect of actually sentencing someone. So while Austin's insight might seem rather obvious now, it was quite revolutionary at the time he was writing, when most philosophers of language were mainly focused on analyzing sentences in terms of whether or not they were true. Austin pointed out that for many utterances, their truth value is not as important as whether or not they are able to perform the action they are intended to perform. So means that John Austin's idea was groundbreaking because at the time most philosophers focused on whether sentences were true or not, and he added that for many utterances, the focus should be on whether the utterance performs the intended action rather than just its truth. Conversational analysis. So, whereas pragmatics begins with the assumption that conversations are logical, as what I've said earlier, conversation analysis begins with the assumption that they are orderly. What orderly means is that they follow a certain predictable pattern, with some kinds of utterances necessarily coming before or following other kinds of utterances. Conversation analysts also see utterances as action. So in this phrase, there are a comparison between pragmatics and conversation analysis. So in pragmatics, it assumes conversation are logical, meaning people make conversational choices based on reasoning. Example being truthful or relevant. However, in conversation analysis, assumes conversations are orderly, meaning they follow predictable patterns, and each utterance leads to a specific response in a structured way. So the core of conversation analysis then is the exploration of the sequential structure of conversation. So according to Skegeloff and Sachs 1973, social interaction is often arranged in pairs of utterances. It is what one person says basically determines what the next person can say. They call these sequences of pair action adjacency pairs. So, in other words, adjacency pairs means that these are sequences of paired action. One person utterances sets up the expected response for the other person. Example, person 1, how are you? This is the first action. And the person 2 would respond, I'm good, thanks. This is the second action in response to the person 1. So, conversation analysis studies the sequential structure of conversation, how each part follows logically from the previous one. So now let's move to our next topic, which is negotiating relationships and activities. So the first one is about power and politeness. Whenever we interact with someone, we always communicate something about our relationship with them. We do this by using various discursive strategies, which we have divided into two categories. The first is involvement strategies, and the second is independence strategies. So it means that when we interact with someone, we convey something about the relationships we share with them. This can be through the way we speak and behave. So, in terms of discursive strategies, there are two strategies. These are ways people use language to express the type of relationship they have. So, the first type is involvement strategies, which means that these are used to show friendliness and solidarity. They make the relationship feel closer and more connected. And the other types of strategies is independence strategies. This one means that these are used to show respect or difference. They maintain a sense of distance and acknowledge a difference in power or status. So, in many cases, both parties in an interaction share a fairly clear idea about how close they are and whether one has more power than the other. But in other cases, participants in interaction need to negotiate their relationship. Such negotiations are common, for example, as people move from more distant to closer relationship, or when one person wishes to challenge another person's assertion of power on dominance. So, in other words, often people have a clear sense of their relationship. It could be close versus distant, powerful versus less powerful. So, however, sometimes the relationship needs to be negotiated. For instance, moving from a distant relationship to a closer one. Example, it could be becoming friends. And another is challenging someone's assertion of power. Some example of this, standing up to a boss or authority figure. This is what means the power and the politeness talks about. But although expectation about when independence and involvement strategies are appropriate and what they mean vary across cultures and groups, most people enter interaction with these three basic ideas. So the first idea is in interactions where the parties are socially distant but relatively equal, both parties are likely to use independent strategies. In other words, it it could be means that when two people are not very close but are relatively equal in status, both are more likely to use independent strategies. So, independent strategies again maintain a certain distance and are used to show respect or difference. So, example of this number one. Two people who don't know each other well. It could be stranger and colleague might both act formally and politely. And then the second is interaction where people are close and relatively equal, they are likely to use involvement strategies. It could be solitary phase system. Unlike the first, they use difference phase system. And it means that when two people are close and have an equal status, like just like friends, peers, they are more likely to use involvement strategies. So when we say involvement strategies, express friendliness and solidarity and help build a more intimate connection. For instance, friends or close colleagues, you would use a relaxed and familiar tone, possibly joking or making personal references. And lastly, the third one is in interaction in which one person has more power than the other regardless of their social distance. The more powerful one is more likely to use involvement strategies, and the less powerful one is more likely to use independent strategies. Means that when the person has more power than the other, the more powerful person tends to use involvement strategies, and while the less powerful person is likely to use independent strategies. This reflects the dynamic where the more powerful person wants to seem approachable or friendly, while the less powerful one uses independent strategies to show respect and maintain a sense of distance. For example, a manager might try to be friendly with their subordinate, but the subordinate would be more formal or distant in their responses. So overall, the people approach interaction with an expectation of how they should behave based on the level of intimacy and power in the relationship. So that's all. And let's proceed to the next topic. So this is the last topic of my report, and this is some of another example. So this is an example of the way participants often strategically mix independence and involvement strategies, and can be seen in the following conversation. This is Martin, the engineer, and Ollie, the subordinate. So as you can see, and I know you can read their conversation. So this conversation is it provides an example of how people use a mix of independence and involvement strategies in their interaction, even when there is a clear power difference. So let's first talk about Martin's. He used involvement strategy, and involvement strategy is friendly and informal. So Martin begins with a friendly and informal approach by saying happy birthday or whatever it is and laughing. This is a classic involvement strategy where Martin is trying to be friendly and personal with Ollie despite the fact that it's not Ollie's birthday. So this attempt to be friendly and informal reflects an involvement strategy aimed at making the interaction more relaxed and establishing a sense of solidarity between the two person between them. So as Ollie responds, Ollie he used the independent strategy, which is the polite. So Ollie responds politely with thank you, but then add that it's actually a while ago. It's likely correcting Martin. So this is an example of independent strategy where Ollie maintains respect and distance while acknowledging Martin's greeting. So additionally, when Ollie offers the Danish pastry, and as what the text here said, that There's a Danish pastry over there if you're interested. This means that this shows difference, that another form of independent strategy, as Ollie is not pushing Martin to accept the offer. So Martin shifts to independence, avoiding imposition. So as the conversation shifts to work matters, Martin changes his tone to a more independent strategy by being considerate of Ollie's time and workload. I'm not sure how busy you are or what you're doing right now. This show respect for Ollie's time and not impose a task on him directly, which is typical of someone in a higher power position trying to avoid pushing too hard. So Ollie responds to Martin's request about the project in a cooperative way, showing that he's ready to engage even though he's busy. For instance, Ollie says, "We're just about to launch the name blah 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 project," and gives Martin further details, and continuing the conversation in an involvement strategy by offering details and engaging directly with the task. So Ollie's engagement here is not formal but rather cooperative, contributing to the flow of the conversation. So, and as I end about this the conversation, despite the power imbalance between Martin and Ollie, they mix both involvement and independent strategies, as you can see in the text. And Martin uses involvement to establish a friendly atmosphere and then switches to independence to avoid imposing on Ollie. And while Ollie, on the other hand, uses independence to maintain respect and politeness, but switches to involvement when he needs to engage with the task at hand. So, overall, in this interaction between Martin and Ollie, they use a combination of involvement and independent strategies. So, this illustrates how people strategically mix these strategies to manage power and politeness in conversation. And that's all. And
so good afternoon everyone. Before I start, let me introduce myself first. I am Rika May Palero, and my topic today it's about the speaking model. So MDA examines the impact of various medias, televisions, computer, and on how people engage in discourse. So according to Lev Vygotsky concept of cultural tools, which encompass both technological tools and abstract tools, language, and counting system diagram. So cultural tools, affordance, and constraint. Cultural tools facilitate certain actions while making others more challenging. So, for example, writing allows for revisions but lacks immediate feedbacks. And although using a microphone enables speaking to large audience but limits privacy. And discourse analysis recognize that the tools at our disposal significantly impact potential actions and social identities. So we have 8 components about the speaking model. So number 1, setting, refer to the time, place, and physical circumstances of a speech event, influencing how participants engage. Although number 2, participants, involves various roles beyond speaker and listener, such as audience and bystanders, recognizing varied identities and interaction. And number 3, ends, relate to the goals of the speech event, which may differ among participants. And number 4, act sequence, the order and form speech acts during the event. And number 5, K, mood or tune, which can alter meaning. And number 6, instrumentalities. The forms are media through which communication occurs, including spoken, written, or mediate formats. And number 7, norms. The shared expectation of behavior and interpretation that vary among different participants. And we have lastly number 8, genre, the type of speech event that aligns with community expectations shaping other component texts. So the interaction among these components is critical for understanding cultural assumptions in speech communities. So we proceed to P8, mediation. So mediated discourse analysis expands the understanding of media form from traditional forms like newspapers and TV to include cultural tools, which can be technological or abstract, influenced by. According to Vygotsky, it highlights that these tools mediate actions and meanings, providing affordances and constraints. For example, writing allows editing but limits real-time feedback from listener. So understanding the rules of cultural tools emphasize how access to certain tools allow for specific actions and identities, leading to power dynamics in communication. Although it is creatively using tools can also bridge gaps between constraints and affordances. The concept of site engagement encompasses moments where different social actors and cultural tools converge, facilitating particular actions. So, this perspective shifts focus from text to social actions, considering all available cultural tools in given context. Mediated discourse analysis thus explore how social action emerge through the interplay of tools and relationship in specific actions and situations. So for my example about this paragraph, imagine a community book fair held in a local park where social actors such as authors, publishers, community members, teachers, and students come together to participate in a shared cultural activity. So itself, the park serves as physical site of engagement where different tools and resource coverage to facilitate interaction and social action. So it was representing literary culture. They engage with readers through books and reading and signings. Although the publisher is responsible for showcasing new books and promoting literacy. And although the community members, including parents, children, and local educators, participating in exploring literature. So, the cultural tools, for example, the books, the primary medium that brings everyone together, serving as catalysts for discussion and personal connections. Mediate discourse analysis. It was focused not just on language as form but on dynamic ways in which social actions are constructed in specific contexts through the interplay of various tools and relationship. In the example of the community book fair. So, discourse interaction. So, how the language used by authors during readings, children's responses during workshops, or informal dialogue among community members reflects broader social values and the value of literacy. However, it interplay of cultural tools on how physical elements like stalls and microphones influence the types of communication that occur. For instance, the presence of microphones may encourage louder, more authoritative speech, while as cozy reading corner, it could be intimate conversation. So, relationship power over dynamic. So, examining how social manifests during the fair, for example, the authority of established authors compared to new ones, or the influence of educators in shaping children's engagements with books. So, so overall, it was demonstrate a shift from viewing text as isolated artifacts to recognizing the broader social context in which language and action are mediated by examining sites of engagement, such as the community of book fair. One can understand how social action and are produced and negotiated through the converge of various actors and cultural tools, revealing the complex interplay between language and cultural and society. So that's all, and thank you for listening today.
Concordances. A concordance is a tool used in linguistics and corpus analysis that lists the occurrences of a specific word or phrase within a large body of text. A corpus, showing the word in its surrounding context. It helps to analyze how words are used in different contexts by providing the sentence or phrases in which they appear. This can reveal patterns in language use, associations with other words, and meaning or connotations. Concordances are often used in research, language teaching, and lexicography to understand word frequency, usage, and relationships within a text. Concordance is a powerful tool for understanding how language works in practice, beyond just individual words, by focusing on the context and surrounding language. Collocation analysis. Collocation analysis plays an important role in understanding how words interact and co-occur in a language, providing insights into syntax, semantics, and pragmatics. It is widely used in linguistics, computational linguistics, and NLP to improve various tasks like language modeling, translation, sentiment analysis, and more. Analyzing the kinds of words that appear together with the other words is an especially useful way to understand the discourse that are expressed in a corpus, because they can reveal patterns of association between different kinds of words or concepts.
So here is the last, B10, procedures for corpus-assisted discourse analysis. So here, the procedures for corpus-assisted discourse analysis talks about conducting a corpus-assisted discourse analysis. Requires a number of steps which include building a corpus, cleaning and tagging the corpus, analyzing the corpus with computer tools using a number of procedures, and finally interpreting the data. These last two steps tend to be cyclical and recursive. That is usually the result of several procedures need to be combined when we are interpreting the data. And often our interpretation lead us to re-performing these procedures or performing other procedures. So, Baker and McHenry and their study reprinted in section D10, for example, choose the text for their corpus on the basis of whether or not they contain the words refuge or refuges, or the phrases asylum seeker or asylum seekers. Another important decision is how many texts you are going to include into your corpus. Generally, with corpus-assisted analysis, the bigger the corpus, the easier it will be for you to make generalization from your results. However, it's also possible to have very small corpora. You will probably also need a reference corpus. A reference corpus is another corpus that you will compare your primary corpus with. It is usually made of a broader spectrum of the text or conversation in the corpus you are analyzing. So that's the end of my part. So I will giving the next virtual floor to the next reporter. Thank you.
So good afternoon everyone, I'm Lady Jane Duhelio and I am the reporter of this part. So, mode, meaning, and actions. Multimodal discourse analysis, which examines how various modes of communications interact, is generally categorized into two main approaches. The first approach centers on text, such as magazine and web page, while the second focuses on real-time interactions. A critical concept shared by both approaches is the notions of affordance and constraints. This idea suggests that different modes of communication or cultural tools facilitate certain actions while hindering others. Understanding these dynamics is essential for analyzing how meaning is constructed across different communicative contexts. So when we discuss that different modes possesses distinct affordance and constraints, we refer to their unique sets of meanings potential and the diverse action they enable. For instance, in written text and spoken language, information must be presented sequentially, adhering to the logic of time. Next is communicative functions of modes. In section A4, we introduce Halliday's idea that language has three basic functions. It is used to represent our experience of the world. It used to communicate something about the relationship between us and the people with whom are the communicating. So there's three ways that people can make sense of. So we call this three function the additional function, the interpersonal function, and the contextual functions. Although these three functions were originally conceived of as a model for understanding language, Kristen and Ivan Lewin insist that they provide a useful starting points of the studying all modes. In their books, Reading Image, The Grammar of Visual Designing, so for example, they explore how image also fulfill this function, offering a deeper understanding of visual communication alongside linguistic modes. So the first function is identitational function. As a note in section A4, the identitational function of language is accomplished through the linking together of participants, typically nouns, with the processes, typically verbs, creating what G 2011 calls who's doing that, who's doing what. In image, on the other hand, participants are generally portrayed as figures, and the processes that join them together are portrayed visually. This highlights the difference between how language and visual modes represent actions and the relationship, emphasizing the unique affordance of each modes in conveying meaning. So at this image, action process are usually represented by what Chris and Van Leeuwen calls vectors, compositional elements that indicate the directionality of an actions. So for example, to this figure, is the arm of the boxer on the left extending rightwards towards the head of the other boxers portrays the process of hitting. There are also other processes portrayed. For example, the upward gaze of the figures in the background create vectors connecting the spectators with the fighters. This use of vectors effectively guides the viewer's attention and enhance the understanding of the action taking place with the narrative. And next is interpersonal function. Another important function of any mode is to create and maintain some kind of relationship between the producer of the message and its recipients. As we said in section A4 in language, these relationships are usually created through the language system of modality as well as through the use of different social language or registers. These aspects of communication is crucial as it helps establish connection and facilitates interaction between individuals. And this is the last function, textual function. As we said above, while texts are organized in a linear fashion based on sequentiality, images are organized spatially figures in an image, for example, can be placed in the center or periphery of the image. On the top of the bottom, the left or right, and in the foreground or in the background. Next is multimodality and interactions. So multimodality and interaction modes in face-to-face interaction such as gaze and gestures also fulfill these three functions. The mode of gaze, for example, has an obvious interpersonal functions, creating a relationship between the gazer between the gazer and whomever, the whomever or whatever in the object of the gaze. It also carries identitational meaning, conveying that the gazer is looking at, watching, or paying attention to something. And next is the desperation plots. Desperation plots refers to an uncount as concordance plots can give you information about where words occurs in text. This can be particularly useful if an analyst is interested in the structure of text or conversation. A genre analyst, for example, might be interested in the kind of words or phrases that occurs in a sections of a text associated with a particular moves, or a conversation analyst might want to explore the kinds of words that occurs in different parts of conversation, such as the opening or the closing. In uncount, concordance plots are generated by clicking the concordance plot tab, typing in a in a search term and clicking starts. The result is a series of bars, each presenting a text in the corpus with lines representing where the search term has appeared. In this figure show the desperation plots generated by searching for the word love in a corpus of Lady Gaga song. So that's all for my part. Thank you.
Good day everyone, I am Taj Mahal Astim Basal and I will be discussing the section C, Exploration, Analyzing Discourse. As we said in section B1, there are basically three different ways of looking at discourse. Number 1, discourse as language beyond the clause focuses on what makes a text or conversation coherent and meaningful rather than a random set of sentences. So number 2 is discourse as language in use, examines what people aim to achieve with their texts or conversations and how these intentions are conveyed. Lastly, discourse as social practice in ideology investigates how authors or participants present themselves in the beliefs or values they promote. So, each perspective leads to different questions about text and interactions in social contexts. So, here's our to consider. For example, the text that is printed on the cardboard sleeve that comes wrapped around a cup of coffee that you buy at the Starbucks. Although this text seems to be rather straightforward in some ways of trivial, if we apply the true perspective on discourse that we discussed in section B1, we can start to see how complex it really is and how it relates to all sorts of non-trivial aspects of our daily lives. We might start by looking at how this text is put together in a formal way. First of all, we would notice that there are three different sections, and so we can ask ourselves how we interpret these three sections as going together and how we interpret the separate sentences in each section as relating to one another. So as you can see in the picture, the text is divided into three distinct sections. The first part presents the Starbucks commitment to environmental sustainability. The second part highlights the specific environmental features of the cup and sleeve, including the use of post-consumer recycled materials. And the third provides legal information about patents and website link for more details. So these sections are distinct but they are related. The first part sets up a claim into initiative. The second provides evidence of this initiative specific product or Starbucks. And the third gives us further legal and informational context. The relationship between these sections guides the reader in interpreting the text. It is both promotional, the commitment to sustainability, and informational, the details on the products and the patents. Number 2 is the meaning or content. The text functions both as a marketing message and as a call to action for environmental awareness. The use of recycled materials in Starbucks products is framed as a positive environmental effort, and readers are encouraged to help the planet, which creates a sense of collective responsibility. However, this message also raises questions about sustainability. The phrase intended for single use only seems contradictory to the sustainability claim, as single-use items contribute significantly to waste. This paradox between marketing language emphasizing sustainability in a product design single-use is an interesting aspect of the text. And lastly is social context. This text is not just about the formal structure or the content itself, but also about how it connects to broader social and environmental issues. Starbucks, as a global company, uses this discourse to align itself with environmental values, particularly in response to growing public concern about climate change and waste. The mention of patents and the website's link suggests a move to solidify Starbucks' position with the market, showing innovation while addressing the sustainability concerns. Furthermore, the use of the term "help us, help the planet" implies a collective action, positioning consumers as active participants in the company's environmental initiatives. The social context here includes ongoing discussion about the corporate responsibility, sustainability practices, and how consumers engage with this effort. So, in conclusion, although this text seems simple, a deeper analysis shows how it is carefully crafted to convey messages about corporate responsibility, sustainability, and consumer participation. By examining the formal structure, meaning, in the social context, we uncover the text functions on multiple levels beyond its surface. So here, it suggests another approach to analyze discourse, applying four key principles to understand text or interactions. So number one, ambiguity of language. Language often has multiple meanings or interpretations depending on context. This principle prompts us to ask how certain words or phrases might mean different things to different people or in different situations. Number two is language in the world. This explores how language connects to real-world contexts, actions, and environments. Questions focus on how language reflects or influences the situation in which it is used. Number three, language and social identity. This principle examines how language reflects or shapes person's identity, group membership, or social roles. It raises questions about what the language reveals about the speaker or writer and the relationship with the audience. Lastly is language in other moods. This involves analyzing how language works with other forms of communication like images, gestures, or sounds to create meaning. It it asks how nonverbal elements enhance or alter the message. Together, these principles encourage asking deeper questions about how language functions in a specific context and how it influences understanding identity and communication. So, look for example at the interaction below taken from my Facebook news feed. The first thing you need to know, if you do not know this already, is that people who use Facebook often take various quizzes or surveys which support to tell them something about their personalities or their hidden desires. Friends sometimes pass these surveys around among themselves as a way to share things that are of interest to them and build feeling or closeness. The second thing you need to know is that Emily Jane Wheeler is my niece, and when she took this quiz, she was 13 years old. Cherry Jones Wheeler is her mother and my sister. In order to apply the principles we discussed in section A1 to this text, we might ask the following four sets of questions. How is the language in this interaction ambiguous? What do the people need to know in order to interpret one another's utterances correctly? Are there any hidden veiled meanings or expressed? The answer is Emily responds probably never. D or smiley is ambiguous because it's exaggerated and playful. The emoticon indicates she's joking, not seriously rejecting the idea of getting a piercing. So number two, how is the meaning situated? How much does the meaning of these utterances depend on where they appear and who says them and what they are trying to do with these utterances? The answer, the meaning depends on the Facebook context, where casual, light-hearted interactions are common. Emily's response is informal and humorous, indicating a non-serious exchange. Number three is how do people use language to express something about they are and what kinds of relationships they have with other people in the interaction? The answer is Emily's playful tone and use of humor suggests she is fun in non-confrontational rudeness question, and Cherry's supportive comment shows a relaxed, friendly relationship. Number 4. How are the other modes? Pictures layout, emoticons combined with language to express meanings. So, the emoticons, semicolon D, softens Emily's response, signaling a playful joking tone without it. Her response might be taken as more serious. By applying these principles to your own interaction, you can analyze how language, context, and emoticon shape communication. For example, a casual text with a weary emoticon can convey a reluctance or discomfort, adding nuance to the words. Good day, everyone. So let's proceed to our next topic, analyzing texture. Good day, everyone. Today, I'll be discussing the concept of analyzing texture and text, focusing on cohesion and coherence and how they shape different types of text. Let's explore how various texts like descriptive pieces, advertisement, legal documents, and news articles use specific cohesive devices and structures. So, first, let's talk about the cohesive devices and how they vary across text types. Descriptive texts, such as scientific descriptions, rely heavily on pronoun references to avoid repeating the same names or terms. Advertising texts, however, often use repetition, emphasizing product names to create a lasting impression. Legal texts also favor repetition to ensure clarity and prevent ambiguity. Lastly, analytical and argumentative texts rely on conjunction to connect ideas logically, although these connections can sometimes be deceptive, as seen in circular arguments. Next slide, generic frameworks of text script. Now, let's look at the generic frameworks. Different text types have predictable structures that guide how they present information. For instance, newspaper articles have a specific framework. They often start with a headline that summarizes the main idea in a concise, telegraphic style, followed by a lead paragraph that introduces the main points. The subsequent paragraphs provide further details or reactions, allowing readers to efficiently absorb the content. And now let's proceed to the case study, Lady Gaga's mid-dress article. So let's analyze the texture of a news article about Lady Gaga's mid-dress. The article uses cohesive devices such as rephrasing instead of pronouns. For example, Lady Gaga is rephrased up as pop diva or hitmaker, which adds variety and keeps the reader engaged. So, additionally, the article employs lexical chains to connect the key elements. For instance, the chains include words related to Lady Gaga, the Mid-Chess Awards, and the controversy. These chains help highlight the main story points: Lady Gaga's controversial mid-chess, its public reception, and its recognition as the most iconic outfit of 2010. Next, importance of texture in news articles. Lastly, why is texture important in the news articles? First, it enhances clarity and entertainment. Repetition reinforces key ideas while rephrasing adds context and makes the article more engaging. Second, the predictable structure of the news articles, from headlines to detailed paragraphs, facilitates quick and efficient reading for the audience. So let's proceed to the summary. In summary, cohesive devices like rephrasing and lexical chains combined with predictable frameworks make text cohesive, engaging, and easy to understand. The article about Lady Gaga's meat chess serves as an excellent example, showing how texture can emphasize the key elements and enhance the overall reading experience. So next, I'll analyze the texture of the blog text from PETA, focusing on how it differs from a typical news article. The blog critiques Lady Gaga's meat dress, emphasizing its ethical implications. Purpose and texture. Purpose and texture. The blog's purpose is argumentative. It aims to persuade readers that wearing a midges is unethical. The tone is emotional, provocative, and opinionated, unlike the neutral tone of a news. So, next is question. PETA uses cohesive devices such as repetition of terms like meat and flesh, pronouns to link ideas, contrastive conjunctions like but and on the other hand, the rhetorical questions to engage readers. This, this create logical and emotional connections throughout the text. So, coherence. The text structure starts with describing Lady Gaga's action, then critiques it ethically and concludes with promoting veganism. It requires some prior knowledge of Gaga's fame, the concept of a mistress, and PETA's advocacy to fully understand. So next, differences from a news article. Unlike news articles, the blog uses vivid and emotional language, subjective arguments, and rhetorical questions to shock and persuade readers. Its goal is advocacy rather than impartial reporting. In summary, PETA's blog uses emotional provocative strategies to argue its point, creating persuasive texture that contrasts sharply with the objectivity of a news article. So, that would be all for my report. Thank you for listening.
So, hello everyone. Our next topic is all about analyzing genres. So, analyzing genres involves more than just analyzing the structure of particular types of text. It involves understanding how these text types function in social groups, how they reinforce and reflect the concerns of and social relationships in these groups, and how they change over time as societies and the groups within them change. Therefore, analyzing genres requires as much attention to social context as it does to text. In addition, analyzing genres refers to the systematic examination of various types of text to understand their structures, functions, and conventions. This process involves looking at the characteristics that distinguish one genre from another, as well as how these genera interact within specific context and discourse communities. So, analyzing genre is an approach that enhances understanding of communication, supports effective writing, and fosters awareness of the evolving nature of text in various discourse communities. And lastly, analyzing genre is essential in various fields such as literature, music, film, and education, as it helps to establish a framework for understanding, interpreting, and evaluating artistic and communicative works. This analysis borrows from conventions and contextual factors that provide meaning to text and performances. Genre can also be seen as existing within larger genre ecologies, where texts that are not directly related can still influence one another in subtle or dramatic ways. Like natural ecologies, genre ecologies are not static, conditions change, old discourse communities dissolve, and new ones form. Genres change and evolve as users creatively bend or blend them, or else become extinct if they can no longer fulfill the communicative goals of their users. Therefore, genre analysis must account not just for the way a particular genre is structured and its function in a particular discourse community, but also for the dynamic nature of the genre, how it has and continues to evolve in response to changing social conditions, the relationships it has to other genres past and present, and the multiple functions it might serve in multiple discourse communities. So, one particularly good example of the dynamic nature of genres and their adaptability to different discourse communities and different communicative purposes is the genre of the weblog or blog. A blog is simply a dynamic web page that is frequently updated with entries appearing in reverse chronological order. The genre of blogs includes various subgenres utilized by different discourse communities for distinct communicative purposes. So we have different four types of blogs, and the first blog is the art blog. This blog focuses on visual art, showcasing artwork, critiques, and discussions related to various art forms. Second is the photo blogs. These blogs primarily feature photography, where the images themselves convey stories or artistic expressions. And third, the video blogs, often referred to as vlogs. These blogs use video content to share information, personal experiences, or entertaining stories. And lastly, the microblogs. These are platforms like Twitter, where users share short, concise posts, often revolving around specific themes or updates. So scholars have identified two types of blogs, each with different conventions and purposes. So the two types is the filter type and diary type. Filter type are blogs whose main purpose is to deliver to readers news stories and links to other media that are filtered based on readers' presumed membership in a particular discourse community, usually characterized by factors such as political beliefs, lifestyle, or profession. And the next type is the diary type. Diary type blog are entries that begin with a title and the date and time the entry was written. Sometimes, as in this entry, they do not contain the author's name since all the entries in the blog are all by the same author. In addition, the structure of diary type blogs tends to be more open and unpredictable than that of filter type blogs, as the purpose is for the author to reflect on an experience, thought, or memory. This reflection may take the form of a narrative, an analysis, or even an argument. Therefore, blog entries exist in an intertextual relationship with other texts and other genres. They are sequentially linked in chains to previously posted entries and are often entrained to a sequence of external events, whether it is an unfolding news story or the unfolding personal life of the blogger. They form networks with other texts like entries on other blogs, web pages, social media sites, stories in online newspapers, and YouTube videos. Moreover, blog entries are part of wider ecologies of text and relationships within discourse communities and societies, often playing an important part in the management of social networks or in public debates about important event or political issues. Therefore, blogs play a significant role in analyzing genre due to their unique characteristics and adaptability, which allow for exploration of various communicative styles and conventions. Like for example, blogs often combine multiple genres such as personal narrative, essays, reviews, and commentaries. This blending of forms provide a rich ground for analysis, demonstrating how different genres influence each other. And also, blogs usually invite feedback and interaction, enabling analysts to observe how readers engage with content. Comment sections, for instance, reveal how audiences respond and contribute to ongoing discussions and highlighting the dynamic nature of genres in real time. So, as a relatively new medium, blogs highlight the evolution of genre conventions in the digital age. They show how traditional genres adapt to new technology and communication styles, such as using multimedia elements or informal language, thereby reshaping expectations. So, blog serves as a valuable case study for general analysis by illustrating how different genres interact, adapt, and influence each other with complex communication landscapes. Their diverse formats, reader engagement, and evolving conventions provide insight into the dynamic nature of genres in contemporary media. So that's all, and thank you.
Hi, I will be responsible to discuss the C4 others people's voices. As we have said before, texts are always linked to, draw upon, respond to, and anticipate other texts, and the ways others position themselves and their texts in relation to other authors and other texts contributes significantly to the version of reality they end up portraying and the ideology they end up promoting. There are many different ways authors might represent the words of other people in their texts. They might, for example, quote them verbatim using some kind of reporting verb like said or claimed. Sometimes, the effect of direct quotation can be validate the words of the person by implying that what they said or wrote is so important and profound that it is worth repeating word for word. Ironically, however, this technique can also have the opposite effect, creating distance between the author and the words he or she is quoting and sometimes implying a certain skepticism towards those words. A way of saying, please note that these are not my words, often in cases of direct quotation. The reporting word that is used is important in indicating the author's attitude towards the words being quoted. It is quite a different thing to note something, to claim something, or to admit something. Another way authors represent the words of other people is to paraphrase rather or summarize them. This, of course, gives authors much more flexibility in characterizing these words in ways that support their point of view. Reporting characterizing what the other person seems to be doing with his or her words are used as substitute for the utterance, as when he said, "I'm terribly sorry," is glosed as "he apologized." Sometimes author will employ a mixture of quotation and paraphrase, using quotation marks only for selecting words or phrases. This is most often done when authors want to highlight particular parts of what has been said, either to validate those words or to express skepticism about them. Quotes that are put around single words or phrases are sometimes called scare quotes and are usually a way of saying things like "so cold" or "as she or he put it." By far the most common way to appropriate the words of others is by not attributing them to another person at all, but by simply asserting them as facts. Such practices have different implication in different contexts. In academic contexts, for example, they are often considered as acts of plagiarism. In most other contexts, however, such practices are seen as signs that the author of the text has both into the ideas promoting by the other person. If a politician says in a speech, in order to be secure nations, we must work for energy independence, and then the next day a newspaper editorialist asserts energy independence is vital to our national security without citing the politician as the source of this idea. Chances are that the politician would not accuse the newspaper of plagiarism but rather praise it for the freedom of its editorial staff. Finally, often the words and ideas of other people are not directly asserted but rather indirectly presumed in text. Presuppositions are implicit assumptions about background beliefs that are presented as taken for granted facts. They are among the main devices authors use to promote their ideological positions. They are particularly effective in influencing people because they portray ideas as established truths and preempt opportunities to question or debate them. Both assertions and presumptions make the words and ideas represented more difficult to evaluate because the source of those words and ideas are invisible. Like for a phrase, both also open up lots of possibilities for authors to change, alter, exaggerate, underplay, or otherwise distort the words and ideas of others. On the other hand, assertion and presuppositions also make the relationship between the author and the person whose words he or she is borrowing more ambiguous. The analyst rather can never be certain of how conscious authors are of the source of these ideas in the discourse of others or certain of who these others are. So here in the table, so different forms of discourse representation. So as you can see, there must be a five. So let's go back. Let's talk about the direct quotation. So direct quotation using the exact words of someone else enclosed in quotation marks. For example, the councilwoman said because of overseen circumstances, we will be revising the planned completion date of the project. Paraphrase, expressing someone else's ideas in your own words while maintaining the original meaning. For example, the councilwoman said that the project would be delayed. Selective quotation, choosing specific parts of a source to support a particular point of view, potentially leaving out the other parts that might contradict that view. For example, so the councilwoman admitted that the completion date of the project would have to be revised. Assertion, a statement that is presented as a fact but may not be proven or supported by evidence. Example here, the project is experiencing severe delays. And the last is presupposition. So, an assumption that is made before a statement is even neutered. So, here in the example is unreasonable delays have plagued the project. So, whose islands are this? So, as an example of the way authors represents the words, action, and ideas of other people and how these representations promote certain versions of reality, consider the newspaper article below published on the website of CNN in 2009. The article concerns a dispute between the China and Japan over the sovereignty of a small group of islands in the South China Sea, known by the Chinese as the Diaoyu Islands and by the Japanese as the Senkaku Islands. An effort by the US government to mediate in the dispute, although many people considered news articles to be relatively objective presentation of the facts of particular event. The words reporters use to portray participants and processes in the way they choose to present what relevant parties say about the event almost always promotes a particular ideological stance. So here in the as you can see in the table, so here in the box, so these are the discourse like the transcribing here. So China shuns U.S. mediation in its island dispute with China. So by the CNN Wire staff, in November 3, 2010, updated 0409 GMT 120T 01 HKT. So these are their conversations. So CNN, the United States can forget about hosting trilateral talks involving China and Japan over the disputed islands, Beijing said via state media Wednesday. The territorial dispute between China and Japan over the Diaoyu Islands is the business of the two nations only. Foreign Ministry spokesman Ma Ma Zhaoshu said, according to the Xinhua news agency. U.S. Secretary of State Hillary Clinton made the offer during discussion with the Chinese Foreign Minister Yang Jiechi last week, Xinhua said. So, relationship between Beijing and Tokyo have been strained by their growing dispute over the island, which China calls the Diaoyu and Japan calls the Senkaku. Japan in early September arrested a Chinese fishing crew of the island, leading in the diplomatic battle. In response, China made increasingly aggressive diplomatic threats. Beijing also halted ministerial level talks with Tokyo, and both sides canceled trips into each other nations. Japan has since released the fishing crew, but Beijing has repeatedly said the islands belongs to China. Beijing also says most of the South China Sea belongs to China, disputing neighboring countries' claim the clash over territorial waters and islands and the natural resources that go with them is a flashpoint in the Asia-Pacific region. So, the first thing that we can notice about this version is of the facts is different kinds of processes the different parties are portrayed as engaging in China. So it's described as shunning mediation, making threats, and halting talks, whereas the US is described as making an offer and wishing to host talks. Clearly, the US side is portrayed as the more reasonable and conciliatory of the two parties. The portrayal of Japan is more neutral, although it is portrayed as arresting of a Chinese fishing crew. Later, it is portrayed as releasing the crew. Apart from the processes associated with the different actors, the ways the words of the actors are represented also reinforce the impression that China acted aggressively. In the first paragraph, the words of the Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesperson are paraphrased in a way that gives them an aggressive argumentative tone. The United States can forget about hosting territorial trilateral talks about the direct quotation that is given in the next paragraph. However, it is clear that this is not all what the spokesperson said. The article does not quote nor give much detail about what the U.S. Secretary of State said that led to this response other than characterizing it is an offer. Whether it was an offer, however, or something such else as a threat or warning, is clearly open to interpretation given the Chinese response. The final paragraph of the article gives background information about the situation in the form of multiple assertions and presuppositions whose sources the reader cannot be certain of. It is asserted, for example, that China has made increasingly aggressive diplomatic threats, although it is not clear why their actions have been characterized in such a way or by whom. In the last paragraph, the seemingly objective statement, the clash over the territorial waters in the Pacific region, hides within it a presupposition that the motivation behind the disputes is primarily economic rather than a matter of patriotism or the historical legitimacy of the claim. As I continue my report on C5 Analyzing Speech Acts, in this section, we will consider how principles from pragmatics and conversation analysis can be applied to understanding how people make sense of potentially ambiguous contributions in social interactions. The two types of contributions we will focus on are apologize and threats. Apologize are potentially ambiguous because although they are often accompanied by a rather explicit language like I'm sorry or I apologize. This language, in the absence of other things like an assumption or responsibility or a promise not to repeat the offending action, is something not enough to make the apology felicitous. Furthermore, words like I'm sorry are sometimes used in cases where no apology is intended at all. However, threats are potentially ambiguous because people often issue them in an indirect fashion in order to avoid legal or moral accountability and because, in some situations, people might interpret utterances as threats when they are not intended as such. So here, interpreting apologies. Apologies are among the most studied kind of speech act. Despite this, because of a complexity and context-dependent nature of apologies, there is still considerable disagreement among scholars as the condition that must be present to make an apology felicitous. Part of the reason for this is that people themselves vary considerably in terms of what they require to be satisfied by another's attempt at apologizing in different situations. Consider the following conversation. So here, as you can see, these are the conversations. So according to A, yeah, you forgot. So in conversation B, yes, I am sorry. A, you're always doing it. And responding by the B is I know. So here, as you can see, these will be um the how will be the conversation of interpreting apologies. So these will be from Scale Glove 1988. An analyst looking at this conversation with no knowledge of the context in which it takes place, we must rely on the sequential placement of the utterances in order to make sense of what the speakers mean by their words. In particular, the phrase I am sorry in B's utterance in the second line helps us to make sense of A's previous utterance. You forgot? As a complaint rather than as simply as assertion. At the very least, we can be sure that B has taken this utterance to be a complaint. Furthermore, coming as it does after a statement about his or her own behavior. So rather, as I continue my report on C5 analyzing speech acts. In this section, we will consider how principles from pragmatics and conversation analysis can be applied to understanding how people make sense of potentially ambiguous contributions in social interactions. The two types of contributions we will focus on are apologize and threats. Apologize are potentially ambiguous because although they are often accompanied by a rather explicit language like I'm sorry or I apologize. This language, in the absence of other things like an assumption or responsibility or a promise not to repeat the offending action, is something not enough to make the apology felicitous. Furthermore, words like I'm sorry are sometimes used in cases where no apology is intended at all. However, threats are potentially ambiguous because people often issue them in an indirect fashion in order to avoid legal or moral accountability and because, in some situations, people might interpret utterances as threats when they are not intended as such. So here, interpreting apologies. Apologies are among the most studied kind of speech act. Despite this, because of a complexity and context-dependent nature of apologies, there is still considerable disagreement among scholars as the condition that must be present to make an apology felicitous. Part of the reason for this is that people themselves vary considerably in terms of what they require to be satisfied by another's attempt at apologizing in different situations. Consider the following conversation. So here, as you can see, these are the conversations. So according to A, yeah, you forgot. So in conversation B, yes, I am sorry. A, you're always doing it. And responding by the B is I know. So here, as you can see, these will be um the how will be the conversation of interpreting apologies. So these will be from Scale Glove 1988. An analyst looking at this conversation with no knowledge of the context in which it takes place, we must rely on the sequential placement of the utterances in order to make sense of what the speakers mean by their words. In particular, the phrase I am sorry in B's utterance in the second line helps us to make sense of A's previous utterance. You forgot? As a complaint rather than as simply as assertion. At the very least, we can be sure that B has taken this utterance to be a complaint. Furthermore, coming as it does after a statement about his or her own behavior, rather than a statement about something or somebody else. We are able to interpret these statements, I am sorry, as an apology rather than expression sympathy. Finally, we are able to interpret its statement as an apology because A appears to interpret in that way. At the same time, however, A does not fully accept B's apology, rather than saying something like it's okay, he or she makes yet another assertion, which we also interpret as a complaint or rather an elaboration on the first complaint. This is not a preferred response to an apology, and thus leads B to infer that further work has to be performed on the apology front. Those B's next contribution, I know, is offered not as a simple statement of fact or of agreement, but as a further admission of guilt, an elaboration of the original apology. The important thing to notice about this exchange is that the statement, I am sorry, is apparently not sufficient to successfully perform the apology. In the first instance, and it is also accompanied by an acknowledgement of fault. Yes, but even this is not enough to elicit A's acceptance of the apology. B is also required to momentary lapse but an habitual behavior. So therefore, even when the utterance seems to satisfy a set of objective conditions for an apology, there is no guarantee that is will be accepted as such by the recipient. So here, there are lists of two potential problems with this set of conditions. The first is that is propositional content of apologies is often not explicitly stated in the apology itself, but uh, rather implied based on some previous action or utterance. And when it's stated, even if it's represented as an offense against an address, it may not be exactly the offense for which the address is seeking an apology. B in the above example might say, I'm sorry for upsetting you. So, which is quite different from saying, I'm sorry I forgot. The second problem has to do with what needs to be done in order for the utterance to count as an expression of regret. As we saw above, the utterance I am sorry, which is clearly an expression of regret, is not always sufficient to accomplish an apology. At the same time, there are many instances in which regret is expressed which would not be considered apology. For example, a job applicant might receive a letter with a sentence, we regret to inform you that your application has not been accepted. Even though this is not explicitly expression of regret, and the addressee might indeed regard the rejection as an offense, few people would regard this as a true apology. According to Cohen, Alstein, and Rosenstein, 1987, 6, rather, have pointed out that apologies often involve one or more of the following verbal strategies. So here is an expression of apology. So here is I am sorry. An explanation or account of the situation. I've so here is an example. I've had a lot on my mind lately. Then next is an acknowledgement of responsibility. So it says here in the conversation, I know. An offer of repair. So here is how can I make it up to you? So next, and the last but not the least, a promise of forbearance, or I'll never do it again. So here is the perfect apology. In fact, contains all of these elements, even when and some of the most of them are implicit rather than stated outreach for something to have the force of apology. However, only one of these strategy is necessary in some cases in which only one strategy is used. So, however, the speaker leaves it up to the addressee to infer that an apology has been made by the referring to the conversational maxims. I might, for example, say, I feel terrible about shouting at you yesterday. Flouting them, so here is not seem directly relevant to our conversation, leading me interlocutor to take the statement as implying something more than a simple assertion. In many cases, however, addresses require more than one of the above strategies to be used in order to be satisfied that an apology is complete and sincere. So, interpreting threats. So, threats suffer from the similar ambiguity as apologies because people often depend a great deal on implicator when ensuing them. Consequently, as with apologies, how they are interpreted by those to whom they is issued matters a great deal. In some ways, the felicity conditions for threatening are quite similar to those for promising, warning, and advising. All of these speech acts have to do with something that will or will not happen in the future, depending on whether or not certain conditions are met. In fact, very often words like promise, advise, and warn are used to issue threats, as in, I'm warning you, if I see you around here again, I promise you I'll kill you. And if you value your life, I advise you to pay what you owe. So here is stated here uh, is an example of interpreting threats. So the main difference between a threat is this and these other three speech acts are that number one is unlike a promise, what is threatened in harmful rather than beneficial to the addressee. The second one is unlike a warning, the action requested is for the benefit of the speaker rather than the addressee. And the last but not the least is unlike advice, the speaker takes his or her own perspective, not the hearer's, and he or she controls the outcome rather than the hearer. So the linguist Roger Choi summarizes these differences in the following table. So here, as you can see in the table, so table C5, so comparison of threatening, warning, advising, and promising. So here, as you can see, these will be the the to the speaker's benefit, to the hearer's benefit, to the hearers, the training for the speaker's perspective from hearers perspective, speakers control outcome, hearers control outcome. So uh so this will be the comparison of the treating, threatening, warning, advising, and the promising. So that will be all. Thank you and good evening.
Now let us proceed to the next topic, which is being in a relationship on Facebook. So, entering a romantic relationship is no one's process that involves deciding how and when to express the relationship status, which has evolved from traditional symbols like school rings to modern republic declarations on social media platforms like Facebook. So here, entering into a romantic relationship is a complex social practice that varies across different cultures. Individuals must navigate when and how to express the relationship status to each other and to others. For example, In North America, a common practice in the past involved boys giving their girlfriends school rings to signify that they were going steady. With the advent of new media, such as Facebook, these practices have transformed, as the platform offers users the ability to publicly declare their relationship status through specific categories like single or in a relationship. While Facebook provides new affordances for announcing relationship status, it also imposes constraints. Users may find it challenging to indicate non-traditional relationships due to limited options in the drop-down menu, and social pressures to clarify their status to others in their network. Garzon highlights that not everyone utilizes these tools similarly. Some individuals may use the relationship status feature to obscure rather than clarify their romantic affiliations. Therefore, understanding how social practices around relationship management have evolved requires a closer examination of the interplay between the cultural tools available on Facebook, the dynamics of social networks, and the diverse experiences of individuals. Additionally, being in a relationship on Facebook exemplifies the interplay between the notions of affordances and constraints, social practices, and sites of engagement within the context of social media usage. So when it comes to the affordances and constraints, Facebook relationship status feature create specific affordances that enable individuals to declare their romantic affiliations publicly, facilitating actions such as sharing personal milestones and engaging with friends' reactions. However, these affordances come with constraints. For example, the predefined categories like single or in a relationship limit the expression of more nuanced relationship dynamics. Users might feel pressured to fit their experiences into these rigid classifications, potentially affecting their social identities. So this highlights how different cultural tools like Facebook can make certain actions, such as publicly declaring one's relationship status, more accessible while simultaneously imposing limitations that alter how individuals perceive and perform their social identities. And next, when it comes to social practices, the act of changing one's relationship status on Facebook has evolved into a recognizable social practice that conveys significant meaning in contemporary romantic relationships. This practice encompasses a combination of actions: declaring the relationship publicly, responding to social feedback, and adjusting the status upon relationship changes like breakups. So such practice are validated and reinforced through social discourse, including commentary from peers and collective societal norms surrounding dating and public display of affection. Through these interactions, individuals navigate the social significance of their relationship status, which can dictate how they are perceived by others within their social circles. Next is site of engagement. So when it comes of the sites of engagement, Facebook also functions as a site of engagement where cultural tools, social relationships, and individual experience intersect. The platform's design encourages users to engage with its feature in ways that reflect their social dynamics. When one partner updates their status, it not only signals something about the relationship, but invites reaction from friends, facilitating conversation and social management. Moreover, the knowledge and experiences of social actors influence how they utilize this tool. For example, younger users may treat relationship statuses more casually compared to older generations who might view them as more consequential. Therefore, the act of being in a relationship on Facebook embodies the interconnected notions of affordances and constraints, social practices, and sites of engagement, illustrating how tools of mediated discourse analysis can enhance our understanding of social actions and their implications in digital context. That's all, and thank you.
So, good morning, everyone. So, I will be discussing the analyzing context. So, understanding the context of speech events. When studying how people communicate in a specific situation, it's not just enough to look at what is said in a conversation or read transcript. To really understand what's happening, you need to see how people interact in real life and talk to them them about what they think is important of being a part of the situation. It's often helpful to speak with a range of people involved in that event, since different roles can lead to different experiences and views. Two important thinkers, Gregory Bateson and Jurgen Ruish, suggest that researchers should gather four key types of information. What people think others need to know. This means knowing what participants believe is important for others to join in conversation effectively. For example, in a skateboarding event, there are certain skills or knowledge that skaters expect new people to know if they want to join in, like the basic tricks or the rules of the group. It's about what the participant thinks is more important for everyone to understand to fit in or communicate properly in a specific situation. Individual experiences refers to the unique stories and knowledge of people who have been in that event before. So these experiences help them understand how these things work and guide them in how to act or speak. For example, a skater who has been in merry competition may know the unwritten rules about respecting others. Skaters or when to cheer for someone, their experiences shape how they communicate and interact with others in that event. Objective observation. This is about watching how people actually behave during the speech event without letting personal biases influence what you see. Number 4, comparison with your own knowledge. This involves the analyst reflecting on their own experiences in similar speech events and comparing that with what they have observed and heard. Compare and contrast. Look at the different speech events or consider the varied perspective of different people involved in the same event. Be specific. Choose particular phrases or exchange what would not make sense outside the context of the speech event. One common mistake is simply describing the speech event using a structured model such as hymns speaking model without delving into the reasons behind the behavior expectations. So while it's useful to outline how the event functions, this approach can miss the important why behind the behaviors and interaction. To understand how people communicate in specific settings, researchers need to gather various types of information, reflect on their own experiences, and dig deeper into the social dynamics in play. So this approach leads a richer and more meaningful analysis of communication.
Analyzing multimodality. In this section, we will practice applying some of the ideas we introduced in sections A9 and B9 to the analysis of multimodality in a text and face-to-face interaction. We will try to show how the analysis of multimodality cannot just help us to understand how text and interactions are structured, but also how they promote certain ideologies and power relationships. Multimodal analysis is a complex and rapidly developing field, and it would be impossible to demonstrate all of the many tools and concepts analysts have developed for the analysis of things like images, gestures, gaze, and posture. Instead, we will introduce a few basic tools and key questions that can guide you in this kind of analysis and encourage you to refer to the resources in the list of further readings for information on other tools and procedures. So the picture shown is the example of an advertisement. It's nice to be chased. So this example is an advertisement that appeared in the station of the mass transit railway in Hong Kong in 2005. It portrays a woman with wings in the foreground and two men in the background holding butterfly nets. The settings of the picture seems to be a wooded area and reminiscent of the setting of fairy tales, and this fairy tale feeling is increased by the unconventional dress of the participants and the wings on the woman's back. Underneath the two men appears the slogan, "It's nice to be chased, Butterfly Bra by Waco." So overview, the ad is analyzed in terms of ideational, interpersonal, and textual functions as well as the underlying ideologies it promotes. The first one is ideational function. The picture contains three participants, one woman and two men who are interacting with one another in a kind of narrative. The image shows one moment in the story which the viewer is invited to imagine as part of more extended, perhaps endless, or chase. So the image presents narrative with three participants, a woman and two men, and the main action of chasing is inferred through the men's gaze toward the woman and the context provided by the slogan. The woman's gaze is turned away, suggesting she is playing hard to get. There is ambiguity in the men's body language, with their arms seemingly moving toward each other, which hints at a possible homosexual relationship challenging. So the second one is the interpersonal function. None of the participants in the picture looks at the viewer. The man looks forwards the woman and the woman looks up into space. This gives the viewer takes the position of a voyeur. So the viewer is positioned as a voyeur watching a private scene where the woman pretends not to notice the man's gaze. This creates a sense of intimacy with woman as she is closer to the viewer, while the men remain in the background. So the image fosters a sense of secret observation with the viewer, the man, and the woman all playing roles in this dynamic. In textual function, the woman is obviously the most important character in the story as she is placed in the foreground of the picture with her whole displayed, while the men are in the background with half of their bodies obscured. So the woman is placed in the foreground, as they say, and representing passivity and naturalness, while the men are shown in the background, suggesting activity and intellectualism. The composition encourages the viewer, like more likely a woman, to focus on the man. The ad conveys a complex message while the woman is being watched. She holds the power as symbolized by her wings and the idea that she cannot easily be caught. Lastly is the ideology. So the picture is rich in imagery from both science and literature. The scene reminds the viewer of fairy tales and myth containing forest nymphs. At the same time, there is the clear hint sexual pursuit reinforced by the relative lack of clothing of all participants. So the advertisement blends elements of fantasy or fairy tales and sexuality, portraying the woman as a desirable or unattainable object. So the men are depicted as scientists or hunters, positioning the woman as a specimen to be admired and captured. The ad promotes the idea that women should aspire to be desired, chased, and secretly watched, but also remain in control and difficult to catch. This reflects societal ideologies of power, sexuality, and gender roles where a woman are both passive objects and empowered individuals. So now we will turn to how you might go about analyzing multimodality in face-to-face interaction. So the two participants in the picture are the tutor, the woman seated on the right, and the client, the man seated on the left. So the session begins with the tutor saying and making two small beat gestures with her pen toward the client's essay lying on the table in time with two syllables. So beat gestures are perhaps the most common kind of gestures, and we use them to keep time in interactions, often tracking the rhythm of our speech, and they can also function to signal that a new higher level action or a new frame is being taken up, much like discourse markers. In this case, the two beats along with the utterance signal that a new part of the tutoring session is about to start. And the overview of our activity is to analyze an advertisement or face-to-face interaction using multimodal discourse analysis to examine how visual elements and text convey ideational, interpersonal, and textual meaning, and how these meanings shape social relationship or version of reality. So the example of face-to-face interaction is first the setting, a university writing center where a tutor helps a student with their writing assignment. Second is microanalysis, focus on a 15-second interaction showcasing the complexity of face-to-face communication. Small actions like gaze, shift, gestures, posture, and intonation contribute to the overall meaning. Lastly, tools, multimodal transcription, capturing the frames at meaningful moments to analyze actions like gaze, head movements, and gestures. Analysis example, tutor-client interaction. So the tutor uses gestures, pointing with a pen, and gaze to guide the conversation, signaling control and directing the student's attention to the essay. So the client's gestures, like touching their chin or glasses, show thoughtfulness and response to the tutor's cues. And power dynamics are highlighted through the tutor's frequent gaze, posture, and control over objects like pen and essay, positioning the tutor as the more dominant participant in the interaction. So the key concept of our activity is sequentiality, lower level actions like gestures, and arrange in meaningful sequence to build higher level actions like completing a tutoring session. Last is negotiation of actions. Participants' actions are mutually influenced by one another, shaping the interaction. So overall, the analysis illustrates how multiple modes like gestures, gaze, speech, and posture work together to manage interaction and construct social relationships, such as the power imbalance between tutor and student. So I guess that would be all for my part. And thank you so much for listening.